Lord of Mystery, The Undead Don't Die from Passing Fire by author Ni Di Xun Zong. Chapter 151 to 160. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. Chapter 151, You're Being a Bit Uncivilized. On a fertile field in the suburbs of Backland, a river ran from a distance, curving around the cliff ahead. One side of the cliff was bare, revealing pure white rock, which from afar had an exceptionally sacred beauty. And in the river bend, there was a hidden underground entrance. Is this the place? Ember silently watched the cave entrance that seemed ready to devour anyone who entered, standing rooted to the spot and thinking for a moment. Then, he pushed aside the concealing weeds and bushes and slowly walked down into the underground. Inside the cave was a mausoleum of the Aemon family, a great noble family from the 4th epoch. The information about the mausoleum was revealed to him by Klein, because Klein thought Ember might be interested. And indeed, he was, otherwise Ember wouldn't have come. The stairs made of black marble, having been washed by 1,000 or 2,000 years of time, still maintained sufficient hardness, without any signs of corrosion. Ember followed it all the way to the bottom, where he saw asymmetrical stone pillars and patterns that looked like they were hacked by knives and axes, characteristic of the 4th epoch. Those pillars stood on either side of a wide path, dividing many shadowy corners shrouded in darkness. Even Ember couldn't help but suspect that the next second, a ferocious and terrifying monster would leap out from those shadows, roaring and pouncing towards him. However, as Ember approached, the sacred light emitted by the sun beetle helmet on his head immediately dispelled the darkness, illuminating the surrounding path. There was nothing in those seemingly dark corners, only flagstones also polished from black marble. Finally, he reached the end of the passage. Ahead was a huge, heavy, double-leaf dark gray stone door. The stone door had cracked open a gap wide enough for 2 people to walk through side by side, and the inside was deep and dark. Clap! Ember stopped in front of the door, his gaze sweeping towards both sides of the stone door, as if some terrifying monster was hiding behind it. After all, he had been tricked more than once or twice, which was extremely insulting. After a brief thought, he took out the bone ashes. Ding-a-ling. Inside the dark passage, the crisp sound of the bell echoed continuously. And as the bell rang, 3 tall silver knights wearing bright silver armor and helmets adorned with horns appeared from a burst of gray fog. Without exception, they all held longswords and heavy knight shields engraved with deep grooves. The deep light in their eyes beneath their helmets flickered, and the moment they were summoned, they understood their duty. Amidst the metallic clashing sound of armor rubbing, they fearlessly charged towards the darkness ahead. Their footsteps were incredibly heavy, yet their speed was faster than anyone could imagine. Roar! A monster's roar seemed to come from the darkness, and in the reflection of the bright silver armor, one could vaguely see a ferocious monster hidden behind the stone door pouncing towards the tall knight. But in midair, it was sent flying by a side charge from the silver knight, who used the silver knight shield to directly knock it back, and then swung the longsword to stab the monster's body. More and more monsters pounced on the silver knights from the darkness, and then one after another, they died under the silver knight's longswords. However, Ember, standing behind the stone door, was not in a hurry to enter. In his hand, he held the twilight charm given by Ceres. At the same time, a dark energy emitting an unsettling aura began to gather continuously in Ember's palm, and finally spiraled into the deep darkness behind the stone door. Clap! Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Amidst countless tiny rustling sounds, the dark energy that landed on the ground instantly evolved into countless tiny black beetles. They formed a black tide, like army ants, frantically gnawing at everything in front of them. And this was precisely one of the rare dark-type miracles among miracles. Open black lens bracket Doris's erosion close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket The miracle of the mad tutor, Doris. Can summon a large swarm of insects to fiercely gnaw at enemies. Those who stand on the edge of the abyss sometimes fall. At this time, she can benefit and will certainly be intoxicated by it. Close black lens bracket. Bang bang. The silver knights who had finished dealing with the enemies put away their longswords, the deep light in their eyes revealing themselves beneath their helmets. They did not stop, but quickly dashed forward, their heavy footsteps fading into the distance. During this time, there seemed to be accompanying heavy collision sounds, as if some mechanism had been triggered. And also moving away was the swarm of insects that formed the purest black tide. They would not disappear until they had completely gnawed away everything in front of them. Ember nodded slightly, then took a step and slowly passed through the stone door. Bathed in the soft light of the sun beetle helmet, Ember could see patches of stains and debris on the ground. They all once belonged to the monsters hidden in the darkness, but now they had all been completely gnawed away by the swarm of insects, leaving only a few residues that barely proved their former existence. But that was all. Merely relying on these residual stains made it impossible to identify the species of the monsters that had once been active here, nor could one guess the functions of the mechanisms that had been set up here. With the Silver Knights and the swarm of insects clearing the way, the path behind the stone door was unobstructed, leaving only Beander characteristics scattered on the ground. Ember picked up the spoils of war as he continuously delved deeper into the mausoleum. But along the way, Ember began to doubt whether this mausoleum might just be a decoy tomb. After all, according to convention, a noble member's tomb would more or less contain things that indicated their status and glory during their lifetime. And when a tomb becomes a mausoleum, or even a grand mausoleum with enough space, it is very common to use murals to tell the story of the owner's life. This was not uncommon even in older and more ignorant eras, and was even the most common method. The first thing humans learned was drawing, not writing. Even the ruined mausoleum on the mysterious island he had reached under Alger's guidance also had a large number of murals. However, in this Aemon family mausoleum, the walls on both sides of the passage were bare, not only lacking similar murals but even decorations. Click. Finally, after walking for a distance, Ember saw a picture frame. It was hanging on the wall about 7 or 8 meters ahead, brownish yellow in color, with obvious wood grain, and only its side was visible for now. This was the only decoration encountered along the way, besides the monsters in the darkness, and anyone could see its strangeness. Ember casually put it away, while also glancing at the description. Open black lens bracket ghost picture frame close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket a mystical item from the Aemon family of the 4th epoch. As long as one enters its range and is reflected into it, the spirit body will instantly detach from the flesh, becoming a portrait. And be forever sealed within it. Close black lens bracket. Ember instantly understood that this painting was probably the real trap of this mausoleum. Even if someone managed to pass through the blockade of those monsters and reach here, they would have to pass through this painting to get through this passage. And if someone who didn't know its details came here, once they stood in front of this painting, they would instantly be reflected into it, their spirit body detaching from their flesh to become a portrait, until their physical body died. It must be said that this painting had a die upon seeing light attribute. It could be said to be a pretty good mystical item, and the Aemon family placing it here was not without reason. But now, this painting belongs to me. Ember withdrew his gaze and continued towards the main tomb chamber at the end of the passage. At the end of the passage, the 3 Silver Knights and the black swarm of insects were all stopped there. They seemed to be blocked by something. When Ember approached, he found that there was a black stone door full of patterns that looked like they were carved by knives and axes. Under the illumination of the sun beetle helmet, Ember saw the full appearance of the stone door. In the center, a grayish-white disc was embedded. The surface of the disc was divided into 12 sections, with a black pointer, just like a clock outside. However, the sections were not evenly distributed on the disc. They were of different sizes, extremely asymmetrical, and half of each section was smeared with shadow. This immediately reminded Ember of the worm of time left behind after the Aemon clone's demise. Since Aemon was stuck in the door and unable to move at the time, that worm of time was ultimately left outside, obtained by Little Sun, and used to create the lie of Aemon being hostile to the true creator. Ember withdrew his thoughts and slowly walked towards the stone door. Along the way, the swarm of insects covering the passage pushed aside to both sides, revealing the smooth black marble floor that had remained unchanged for thousands of years, welcoming Ember's arrival like loyal servants. Ember stopped in front of the stone door and, without hesitation, placed his hands on both sides of the stone door and pushed outwards with force. Creak. Accompanied by the heavy sound of the stone door opening, it slowly pushed open a deep passage wide enough for 2 people to pass through. However, Ember had no intention of continuing to push it, and just let it remain half open. Bang bang bang. The Silver Knights, with their heavy footsteps, entered the tomb chamber first, followed closely by the black beetles, which almost instantly completely filled the rather spacious tomb chamber, searching for anything that could pose a threat. In the center of the tomb chamber, a high platform was built up, on which a deep black coffin was placed. Iron-colored lamp stands protruded from the surrounding walls, supporting white candles that were still quietly burning. All the candle flames did not flicker, remaining as still as a frozen picture, showing no signs of having undergone the passage of 1 or 2,000 years. Along the straight path from the stone door to the coffin, there were bodies lying down. Some wore black woolen coats and semi-high silk top hats, while others were dressed like ordinary workers and wore baseball caps, looking like people who had entered here in recent years. Without exception, all these bodies had sparse white hair, wrinkled skin, and obvious spots, like old people in their 80s or 90s. There were no obvious wounds on their bodies, they seemed to have died of old age while still alive, and they had only died recently, not yet having time to rot. The authority of time. Ember raised an eyebrow slightly, immediately associating this with Amon's ability. Aemon clones would leave behind worms of time after death, and in the City of Silver's ancient texts described by Little Sun, the Creator was accompanied by 8 kings of angels, one of whom was the Time Angel. And this Time Angel could very likely be Aemon, possessing authority similar to controlling time. The only question was, how did these people get in? There were countless monsters in the tomb chamber, a ghost picture frame in the passage, and a heavy stone door at the end of the passage that hadn't been opened at all. These obstacles were all intact before Ember arrived, so how did these people silently bypass those mechanisms and traps to reach this tomb chamber? Even if they were lucky enough to bypass those monsters and successfully pass through the trap of the ghost picture frame. What about that closed stone door? It couldn't be that after they died here, someone thoughtfully helped them close the stone door, could it? Or, there was another possibility. Beyonders with special abilities. Ember looked at the bodies, his brows slightly furrowed. Among the Beyonder pathways he knew, the door pathway could achieve everything mentioned earlier, even if it was just an apprentice. With the ability to pass through walls, they could potentially pass through the blockade and traps of those monsters unharmed. They wouldn't even need to open the door, they could just pass directly through the stone door into the tomb chamber. But if that were the case, where were the Beyonder characteristics of these bodies? It couldn't be that everyone who came to this tomb chamber was just ordinary people, could it? Ember looked ahead, his gaze stopping on a picture frame lying face down at the bottom of the high platform. The black tide formed by the swarm of insects stopped around the high platform, forming a circle around it, leaving a large gap centered on the high platform. Because any insect that entered this gap had instantly died, turning into nothingness. Ember thought for a moment, then slowly took a step, walking towards the high platform at a leisurely pace. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. As he got closer to the high platform, Ember could clearly feel a certain power affecting his body. It was the great power of time. If it were a normal person, they would probably be aging at a speed beyond imagination at this moment, their teeth falling out, white hair thinning, skin wrinkling, and rapidly approaching death. However, this method had no effect on Ember at all. Although the power was constantly affecting his body, Ember's pace did not slow down because of it. He just walked step by step to the high platform, bent his knees, curved his back, and flipped over the picture frame that was lying face down. Whoosh! As the picture frame was flipped over, wind suddenly blew up inside the sealed mausoleum, dispelling the invisible confinement and silence. The candles on the iron-colored lampstands quickly burned, becoming exceptionally bright, but soon reached the end of their life, melting completely. The old bodies on the ground rapidly decayed, emitting a foul smell. At the same time, the Beyonder characteristics in the bodies slowly condensed, some even combining with certain parts of the body, forming terrifying mystical items. Ember was not in a hurry to continue forward, but lowered his head to look at the picture frame he had flipped over in his hand. This was a portrait of a young man with a smile on his lips. Black eyes, black curly hair, a broad forehead, a thin face, wearing a crystal monocle and a black pointed soft hat. Ember had seen this person, seen him stuck in the door. His name was Aemon. Ember frowned slightly, casually put away the picture frame, and continued up the steps towards the high platform, towards the black coffin. He reached out his hands and placed them on the coffin lid, pushing with force. Creak. With a grating, heavy friction sound, the coffin lid was slowly lifted. But there was no body inside, the coffin was empty, only a layer of pale gold soft cushion lining the bottom, embroidered with a worm having 12 rings. Ember thought for a moment, then immediately put away the golden soft cushion. After all, he had come all this way, he couldn't leave empty-handed, could he? Just as he had put away the soft cushion and was considering whether to take the coffin as well, a voice suddenly came from beside his ear. Isn't that a bit impolite of you? Chapter 152, Understood, you don't have a mother. Ember followed the sound and saw a figure abruptly appear under the wall on the other side of the coffin. It was a young man with slightly curly black hair, a wide forehead, thin cheeks, deep black eyes, and a monocle. Aemon. The blasphemer, Aemon. Ember thought for a moment, seemingly feeling that it was indeed a bit impolite, so he moved his hand away from the coffin and asked very politely. Is this your grave? Aemon walked forward 2 steps leisurely, like strolling in a courtyard, and said calmly. To be precise, this is the mausoleum I prepared for myself. You know, during the 4th epoch, there were constant conflicts between various forces. To compete for the chance to become a god, I was targeted by many people at the same time, and I might be killed any day. So, it's reasonable for me to dig my own grave in advance, right? But as you can see, fortunately, I managed to survive, so I don't need it for now. That's right. Ember nodded slightly and said, I'm here to dig your grave. Eamon stopped, looking at Ember with a strange expression, not knowing what he was thinking. It's really rare that you'd be interested in the small things in my mausoleum. Eamon shook his head, saying with a hint of playfulness as he continued to walk forward. As he approached, the tide of insects that had been blocking his way began to die in large numbers. But since they were born of miracle, they didn't leave corpses after death, but quickly turned into a wisp of black smoke and dissipated, leaving large blank areas on the ground. Ember asked thoughtfully, so, the entire Eamon family is just you? Yes. Eamon smiled and nodded, it has always been just me alone. This is not a secret among the great nobles of the fourth epoch. Your main body didn't come. Of course not. Eamon, wearing a pointed soft hat, shook his head and said somewhat playfully, if my main body appeared in Backland, it would immediately trigger a divine descent. After all, the few true gods who exist now don't have a very good impression of me, and some of them even wish they could kill me as soon as possible. Like the Lord of Storms. Yes. Facing Ember's question, Eamon didn't hide anything and said very frankly, he is the one who wants to kill me the most, well, one of them. As he spoke, Eamon had already ascended the stairs leading to the high platform. But suddenly, Ember raised his arm. Bang! With a sound like an invisible mechanism being triggered, Amon's body suddenly froze in place. But this was only for an instant, he quickly returned to normal, as if nothing had happened, and continued to walk towards the high platform. Ember also seemed completely unaware, casually saying, as if chatting with an old friend. I've seen your father, but I haven't seen you. That's normal. Eamon pointed to the wall behind him with an unchanging smile and said frankly, after all, I hadn't been born then, so of course you wouldn't have seen me. Ember looked in the direction Eamon pointed. That section of the wall had become heavily modeled due to the previous, accelerated flow of time, and many murals had been damaged as a result, making it impossible to restore them to their original appearance. The only relatively complete, barely discernible, colored mural was located at the top of the wall and extended upwards to occupy a little less than half of the dome. It depicted a majestic and continuous mountain range. On the highest peak, stood a giant cross, taller than the mountain itself. The cross was covered with layers of light, appearing exceptionally sacred. In front of it, a majestic and tall figure was faintly visible, with the mountain range appearing like a pet prostrate at his feet. Surrounding this figure were angels with 2, 4, and 6 wings, each holding a horn, playing a harp. Or blowing a flute, looking both devout and joyful. Below the mountain range, 2 angels with 12 wings each held a baby and walked humbly towards the mountaintop. The baby on the left had slightly curly black hair, while the one on the right had light golden hair. One had deep black eyes, the other had golden eyes. Other parts of the mountain range faintly depicted giants with shackles and dragons whose feet were bound, forever unable to land. This depicted the scene after the creator reclaimed authority from the 8 ancient gods. The giants and dragons were enslaved by him. It was also at this time that the creator gave birth to 2 sons. The one with black hair was Eamon, as for the golden hair. Who is the other one? Ember stroked his chin and suddenly asked. Eamon had already stepped onto the high platform. He stopped, raised his hand to pinch his monocle, and said flippant. The angel of imagination, the creator's eldest son, Adam, my brother, a fanatic, you can call him whatever you like. He went crazy after father fell due to betrayal, and he has been trying to resurrect our father for so many years. And, he's almost succeeded. Ember said thoughtfully, you're not planning to help him. Eamon adjusted his monocle, sighed, and shook his head. Our relationship isn't very good, so he has never interfered with my matters, and I won't interfere with his. After a slight pause, Eamon asked politely. Do you have any other questions? 1. Ember's expression became serious, and he asked in a deep voice, who is your mother? Amon's expression stiffened slightly. After a long while, he looked up and adjusted the monocle that had become crooked due to his change in expression, and said calmly. My father is a god and does not need to rely on human methods of reproduction to give birth. Just like Saussure, he was created by father using one of his ribs. Ember nodded in understanding and asked politely. So you don't have a mother? Amon's expression suddenly became distorted, his eyes seemingly spitting fire. But soon he couldn't hold back and let out a chuckle, saying playfully. You seem to be looking forward to me showing such an expression. Do you think human ethics would work on me? That's true. Ember nodded in agreement. At the same time, his palms sank, and a greatsword abruptly appeared in his hand. Eamon raised an eyebrow, his gaze sweeping over the greatsword in Ember's hand. The blade of the great sword was forged from hot molten iron containing smoke, staining the entire blade a deep black. The originally complex patterns and symbols on the blade were mostly blurred due to battle scars, and there were even huge claw marks from a devil prince on it. This was the great sword of the former knight Lorien, who single-handedly killed a devil prince. Bang! Ember stepped forward like an arrow, putting all his weight forward onto the Lorien greatsword. In just the blink of an eye, the smoke that had stained the blade black instantly turned into raging flames, covering the entire blade with flames that seemed like a curse. Wait, I just want to talk properly. Amon's expression changed slightly. He seemed completely surprised that Ember would attack without warning and hurriedly tried to stop him. But before he finished speaking, he heard heavy and hurried footsteps beside his ears. It was the 3 silver knights who had been standing on either side all along. The silver knights on the left and right rushed towards him with their shields raised, and the silver knight behind him leapt high into the air, holding his sword with both hands and chopping down at him. Bang! Amon's face turned cold. The silver knight who was chopping down at him suddenly froze in midair. His thought had been stolen by Amon. The next moment, the silver knight, whose body had lost its next instruction and support, fell from midair and landed heavily on the steps, rolling all the way down to the bottom of the high platform. Bang 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 bang. The sturdy armor covering his entire body constantly collided and rubbed against the steps, as if forming a wonderful symphony. At the same time, the silver knights on the left and right sides had also charged forward respectively. They witnessed the state of their comrade and almost simultaneously swung their great swords at Amon. But just like before, they instantly forgot how to swing their great swords. Their attacking thoughts had been stripped away by Amon. But this did not affect their next move. Even if they were dead, even if they had been burned to ashes, the silver knights still had rich combat experience in their minds. At the same time as their attacking thoughts were stolen, their bodies had already reacted further. Using their shoulders to brace against the heavy shields, they charged directly at Amon in the middle. Amon's expression changed, seemingly caught off guard, and in his panic, he actually forgot to dodge. Because the distance was too close and the time was too short, he didn't even have time to steal their charging thoughts and was hit squarely by the 2 silver knights. Bang! In the sound of violent collision and squeezing, the silver knights bracing their shields hit Amon's body from both sides. Like a meat sandwich, they firmly pressed Amon's body between the 2 shields. The sudden impact made Amon's mind seem to be in a momentary trance, and it also prevented him from reacting immediately. And by the time he finally came to his senses, Ember in front of him was already poised and ready, launching a heavy blow while stepping forward like an arrow. The blade of the Lorien greatsword burned with the scorching flames from the devil. It drew a beautiful arc in the air from top to bottom, even the air sizzled from the heat. Wherever the sword edge reached, even the high platform that had remained unchanged for tens of thousands of years was instantly melted, including the coffin that had been blocking the 2 of them and had been coveted by Ember for a long time, which was split in half. But the edge of the greatsword continued its momentum unabated, passing through the coffin and directly hitting Amon below the waist, making his face seem distorted because of it, and his body was lifted high along the scorching blade like a broken rag doll. Amon, who was thrown high, flew into the air, and in an instant was heavily thrown to the ground, losing his breath. His pair of green eyes gradually dimmed, and his figure began to rapidly dissipate. In the end, only a slightly dimmed worm of time with 12 translucent segments was left on the spot. Ember did not look at the corpse, because he had confirmed that he had received Amon's lost Beander characteristic. He looked at the damaged coffin with some regret. It was much more luxurious than the stone coffin he woke up in. But this regret was fleeting, because he quickly turned his gaze to the other side of the tomb chamber. A stone door that was only outlined stood hidden in the corner. At the same time, a silver knight quickly approached the stone door, extending his hands to press on the stone door and try to push it. A stone door that was only outlined stood hidden in the corner. Above the stone door, water light suddenly floated, condensing into a scene so real that it seemed directly touchable. Deep blue waves surged forward one after another. There was thick black mist there, as if it were liquid. A rugged mountain peak extended from the mist, constantly dripping viscous liquid downwards. Behind this mountain peak, the black mist was boundless, with no end in sight. Its bottom also had no limit. The deeper one looked, the more profound it felt, as if once something fell, it would fall forever. A similar scene was still outlined in Ember's mind, from the abyss he had personally experienced. Even today, he still had the ring on his hand that could walk in the abyss. This world also had legends about the abyss, and this door might be connected to the legendary abyss, and Amon might have come here precisely through this abyss. That is to say, he might be able to use the abyss to go to the forsaken land of the gods. However, after Ember witnessed that abyss, he did not have the idea of entering it to find out. Instead, he calmly slung the Lorien greatsword onto his back. At the same time, a crystal staff that seemed to be made of rock appeared in his hand, causing a bright blue light to converge at the blue gem inlaid at the top of the staff, gradually forming a huge vortex that greedily absorbed energy. Finally, the seemingly endless pale blue energy instantly surged from the top of the staff, transforming into a beam of soul torrent that seemed capable of destroying everything, instantly completely engulfing that stone door. Under the bright blue light that illuminated the entire tomb chamber as if it were daytime, the stone door had been washed away to dust at some point, as if it had never appeared, leaving only a large empty space in the wall. But after the stone door was destroyed, the soul torrent did not dissipate because of it. Instead, it suddenly changed direction as if splitting. From the direction it was originally facing the stone door, it suddenly shot towards a certain spot in the air below the stone platform. Bang! As the stream was about to sweep across the empty air, a figure wearing a monocle and a pointed soft hat was forced out of thin air, but before he could dodge, he was swallowed by the soul torrent and completely annihilated, leaving only a transparent little worm with 12 segments on the spot. These were Amon's avatars, most of them parasitized in microscopic organisms in the air, invisible to the naked eye. And there were at least dozens of such avatars in this tomb chamber alone. But unfortunately, Ember didn't need to observe with his naked eyes. Bang! The soul torrent changed direction again, the spraying stream shot across the ground, carving out large, bottomless gullies in the hard stone slabs. Even the void showed large gaps, and the air took a while to refill. Wherever the stream went, Amon's figures appeared one after another in a sorry state, but in the end, they were all annihilated under the washing of the stream, leaving only transparent worms with segments. And the originally flat and smooth, spacious and grand mausoleum, was now crisscrossed with gullies under the washing of the stream. The walls with murals had now become nothing but ruins, making the unsupported ceiling precarious, with 1,000-pound broken stones constantly falling from the top, dropping into the bottomless gullies on the ground. Puff! Finally, the beam of soul torrent began to weaken, constantly shrinking and thinning, like it had been powered off. In the end, the stream at the top of the staff completely died out, all the light completely dissipated, and Ember still held the staff that looked like it was made of stone and appeared unremarkable. But Ember's gaze was still cast forward, towards the position where Amon had just stood. There seemed to be nothing there. But the next second, the air in front of him suddenly fluctuated, and a microscopic creature that was difficult to see with the naked eye crawled out. This creature rapidly expanded, turning into Amon, wearing a pointed soft hat and a classical black robe. He knew clearly that he had been discovered, so he simply stopped hiding. Amon adjusted the monocle on his right eye and frowned. "How did you find out?" Chapter 153. I don't understand what you're talking about at all. Facing Amon's question, Ember casually asked, "Is it possible that it's luck?" Amon put down his right hand that was adjusting his monocle, and Ember's reflection appeared in his eyes. He curved his lips and said with great interest, "That's a bit interesting." He originally didn't intend to fight Ember to the death, as there was no point. The reason he suddenly appeared was, firstly, the other party was here to dig up his grave. It was only reasonable for him, as the owner of the tomb, to meet Ember, right? Secondly, what's behind the door? Ember suddenly asked. "You don't know." Amon looked surprised, seemingly a little astonished by Ember's question. Ember retorted, "Should I know?" "No, it's normal not to know." A deep smile gradually appeared on Amon's face, and he replied in a casual tone, "But there's nothing to hide. That door connects to the abyss. I can use it as a springboard to travel back and forth to the forsaken land of the gods." Just a second ago, they were fighting for their lives, but now they were talking happily like friends who had reunited after a long time. Ember asked thoughtfully, "Abyss and forsaken land of the gods are connected?" "No." Amon shook his head and said frankly, "But I can use some of its characteristics to go anywhere." Amon subtly glanced at the wall in the corner that was now just a huge empty hole. He had originally wanted to use his death to protect that door a little, as this passage was quite convenient. But Ember obviously didn't fall for it. Even after he died, he didn't give up on digging up his grave, and the door was ultimately destroyed. Although it was regrettable, this loss was still within his acceptable range. Amon pushed the monocle on his right eye and said with a smile, "I think we can actually have a good talk. We don't have irreconcilable contradictions, do we?" Ember nodded slightly. "Continue." Seeing Ember agree, Amon's lips curved slightly, but the next second he saw Ember casually drawing the Lorien's greatsword from his back. Amon's curved lips returned to normal, and he shrugged, "If you want Saphira Castle, I can actually give it to you." The last invasion of Saphira Castle was just an accident. You know me, I like adventures. But I actually don't want to bear that fate at all, nor do I have to become a weirdness. This will only lead to the resurrection of the first owner of Saphira Castle, in me, just like the first, resurrected in my father. As you can see, I'm not even a true god, just an ordinary sequence 1. I can't bear such a fate, and I don't want to bear it, so. Ember suddenly interrupted Amon's speech and asked very seriously, what is Saphira Castle? You don't know. Amon showed a surprised expression and was about to explain, but then his expression suddenly changed slightly, as if he finally realized something, and his expression gradually became strange. What did you do to me? Although he always talked a lot, he talked excessively today, even revealing a lot of important information. In these words, he shouldn't have said to Ember, because he should have seen from the beginning that Ember knew nothing about all of this. He was clearly so powerful that even his father was wary of him, and he had even lived from the end of the second epic until now, but he was ignorant of many things. Rather, he was excessively ignorant, so much so that Amon sometimes doubted if he was faking it. You finally reacted. Ember looked at Amon's reaction and shook his head. In fact, I used a sentimental person on you from the very beginning. Sentimental person? What is that? Amon raised his hand and pinched his monocle, not concealing his confusion and doubt. He had read the blasphemy slate, and there were similar abilities among the 22 pathways, but what Ember used was clearly two different power systems. To him, Ember was a strange black hole, and all the abilities he used were completely unknown to Amon. Just made it up casually. Ember shrugged and didn't intend to explain in detail to Amon. After all, they were enemies. Open black lens bracket seek counsel close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket a miracle for the lost. Can receive generous advice from others. And can be used by those without soul. Ember. The standard of the clergy exists in faith, so they do not need unknown advice. Nevertheless, this miracle is still passed down, so that the lost can continue to see a glimmer of hope. Close black lens bracket. That's truly regrettable. Amon sighed, raised his hand and pinched the upper and lower edges of his monocle, and his figure instantly split into two. The number of almonds increased, but only a little. He had the ability to spread a large number of avatars, but he didn't choose to do so. The Amon who was split off and the Amon who stood in place looked at Ember at the same time. The eyes under the monocle had long since lit up with a cold light. Wait. Ember voluntarily took a step back and said quickly, I have one more question. The Amons looked at each other, and then simultaneously turned their gaze back to Ember, saying in unison. What question? Although they responded to Ember's words, the Amons had no intention of waiting for Ember to ask the question at all. One of them instantly stole the distance between Ember and them, while the other simultaneously stole Ember's thoughts, indiscriminately stealing any thought in Ember's mind, preventing him from reacting immediately. And at the same time as doing all this, the two Amons also pounced on Ember simultaneously. He wanted to parasitize Ember. If he were to parasitize an ordinary person, it wouldn't be so troublesome at all. But the target of parasitism was, after all, a target that even his father was wary of, and the strength of these two avatars was truly too weak, so the procedure naturally had to be more complicated. However, the moment Amon pounced on Ember, Ember's figure, which was originally close at hand, suddenly lowered, and then disappeared from sight. The two Amons froze in place at the same time, seeming a little confused about losing their target of parasitism. And when Ember reappeared, he was already behind Amon. The Karthus milk ring allowed him to become invisible during the roll, and the sleeping dragon crest ring concealed the sound he made, thus allowing him to easily complete the Raohu. At this moment, he was standing up again from his invisible roll posture, dual-wielding Lorian's greatsword, and calmly watching Amon's back. It has to be said, the ability to steal other people's thoughts is indeed terrifying, but unfortunately, Amon's stealing has its limits, especially his avatars. At that moment, the Amon stole the distance and also successfully stole his thought of rolling. But unfortunately, the thoughts in Ember's mind were chaotic. The moment Amon stole his thoughts, the thoughts in Ember's mind had already formed a queue. Roll, 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 and so on. Even if Amon stole it once, or even multiple times, the remaining rolls in the queue could still easily move Ember's body. And Amon obviously didn't have the ability to lock on, so he couldn't accurately capture Ember's position at the first moment after losing sight of him. The Amons, both with and without monocles, simultaneously narrowed their eyes, trying to search for Ember's figure around them. But the next moment, the corner of one of the Amon's eyes suddenly caught sight of a broadsword tip. Looking sideways, he found that the other Amon's figure was frozen in place, and a greatsword was directly aimed at his lower back, not far away, and was swung down suddenly. Bang! Before he could react, a terrifying force capable of tearing him apart came from Amon's waist and abdomen. His entire body flew forward instantly, spinning several times in the air, turning into a human cannonball and smashing heavily onto the ground, creating a giant pit over 10 meters deep in the ground made of polished marble that had remained unchanged after thousands of years of erosion. And around the giant pit, countless black worms that were ready to strike rushed into the pit at the first moment, swarming towards the Aemon who had not yet gotten up, as if to devour him completely. And closely following, a mass of residual bedding that seemed capable of burning everything flew from the high platform into the deep pit, completely engulfing Amon's figure. The residual bedding that once gave birth to devils, even today, still has the terrifying power to burn everything. The already sunken deep pit was instantly melted, the area of the pit more than doubled, and the depth was unknown. Only the marble edges of the pit, which seemed to be burning, melting, and flashing with scorching fire, told of the terror of the residue. As for the Aemon in the pit, he had long been swallowed by the bedding, and even the worm of time left behind had turned into nourishment for the flames. Is this necessary? Aemon looked at the fate of his other self in the pit below and sighed, I was already dead, you're just whipping a corpse. Seeing the fate of his avatar seemed to make Aemon feel a sense of empathy, and he clicked his tongue. Ember stood behind Aemon, holding the Lorien's greatsword filled with flames, and comforted him. Don't worry, you'll get the same treatment. Amon's hand holding the monocle stiffened for a moment, and he refused half-jokingly. No thanks, I'd rather not have this treatment. How about you just give me a quick death? All right. Ember nodded slightly, holding the Lorien's greatsword with his right hand, while holding a Yorshka's chime in his left hand. A soft golden light appeared above Ember's head, reflecting a golden magic circle at his feet. Soon, the holy bell in Ember's hand disappeared, replaced by a mass of burning sorcery fire. Ember held the sorcery fire in his hand and then suddenly slapped it against his chest. Oath of Golden Stone. Inner potential. Finally, the sorcery fire also disappeared, replaced by a Lothric military flag in his hand. Clang! The military flag was planted on the ground, and a soft white magic circle slowly appeared, enveloping Ember's figure. Aemon watched with interest as Ember stacked buffs in front of him, neither stealing Ember's thoughts nor taking the opportunity to parasitize. He clenched his right hand into a fist and lightly tapped his monocle. Interesting. The military flag was put away the moment the formation was displayed. Ember held the hilt of the Lorien's greatsword with both hands, making the greatsword burn with flames that sizzled the air again. With a smiling nod from Aemon, the sword body struck his delicate body. Bang! The heavy blade directly passed through Amon's body. His flesh was instantly cut and vaporized by the flames at the same time. With one blow, Amon's avatar completely vanished, leaving only the corpse of a worm of time that plopped onto the ground. Ember's gaze swept around to confirm that there were no remaining Aemon avatars, and then he turned and walked away from the main tomb chamber. Although there were more Aemon avatars this time, their strength was far less than the last time. All the avatars, without exception, only had the strength of a weak sequence 4, and not even a single sequence 3. Although they all had the essence of an angel, it also meant that these avatars were originally pawns. Aemon had no intention of accomplishing anything with these avatars from the beginning, only sending them to gather information. Aemon attempted to obtain the information he wanted from Ember, not hesitating to sacrifice some avatars for this. And Ember also obtained some information from Aemon, such as the resurrection of the weirdness, and the first, and the Saphira Castle, and the abyss. Ember's acceptance of this information was quite high, because in a sense, all of this was also his experience. In the forsaken land of the gods, in a deep darkness somewhere unknown, a flash of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the vicinity. With the light of the lightning, a heavy and wide gray-white building was faintly visible at the bottom of the ravine. The figure was wearing a black classical robe, a soft pointed hat of the same color, with black curly hair, black eyes, a wide forehead, and thin cheeks. It was indeed Aemon. He raised his hand and pinched the crystal monocle, turned his head to the left, looked into the distance, sighed and smiled. As expected, the Beander characteristic hasn't returned, just like before. Aemon shook his head. Although he lost some avatars, to him, he could have as many avatars as he wanted. The only important thing was the Beander characteristic they contained. The loss of this part of the Beander characteristic was the real loss. However, these things were not important either. As long as he ate a few more Beanders from the Marauder pathway, this part of the Beander characteristic could be replenished at any time. Moreover, all of this is worth it. Amon's lips curved slightly. He had already obtained the information he wanted. Although he lost some avatars, it at least allowed him to figure out some of Ember's background. If he hadn't known beforehand about the abilities the other party possessed, which transcended the 22 pathways, he would likely suffer a great loss if he encountered him in the future. And this time, he only used some insignificant avatars to obtain key information, which was undoubtedly a profitable deal. And with this information, he could also make a more accurate judgment about Ember, for example. In the future, I should let my avatars avoid him. Eamon shook his head. Although the Beander characteristic contained in 1 or 2 avatars was not much, if a large number of avatars were lost at once, the lost part of the Beander characteristic would also give him a headache. P.S. Sunlight Straight Sword has AoE, and cannot coexist with Oath of Gold and Stone. But Oath of Gold and Stone can coexist with any sorcery buff, and the military flag buff lasts for 3 seconds. Chapter 154, Cash Ore. At the junction of Hillston District and Sherwood Borough, at 10 in the morning, inside a small booth in a cafe. Ember pushed open the door to the booth, and inside was a young man. He looked to be in his 20s, with eyes similar to an old woman's. In the increasingly cold weather, he wore a black double-breasted long formal coat popular among Backland gentlemen, a semi-tall silk top hat, and a bow tie as if attending a banquet, seemingly never relaxing his standards for himself at any time or in any situation. "I ordered you a cup of coffee," Klein said with a smile. "I don't know if it suits your taste." Ember glanced at the coffee and immediately recognized it as the cheapest South Wales coffee. It wasn't particularly poor quality, but it was only below average. However, he wasn't there to satisfy his appetite, so he didn't say anything. He turned around and sat across from Klein, asking casually, "Do you only have this set of clothes?" Klein was startled for a moment, then answered seriously, "No, I have 2 sets, but the style is exactly the same." "Very reasonable." Ember nodded slightly in agreement. Klein felt like Ember was implying something, feeling uncomfortable all over, and immediately changed the subject. "How is the situation at the Eamon family mausoleum?" Ember pondered for 2 seconds and said concisely, "I encountered Eamon there." "Eamon." Klein felt a chill down his spine and blurted out, "That Eamon from the Forsaken Land of the Gods. There has only ever been one Eamon." Hearing Ember's answer, Klein gasped and couldn't help but ask, "What do you mean?" The entire Eamon family in the 4th epic was fake, and there was only Eamon alone from beginning to end. Everyone else was his avatar. Ember nodded slightly, the answer simple and clear. Although Klein was mentally prepared, his mind tensed up, and he felt a chill all over. At the same time, Klein felt a bit fortunate that he hadn't rashly explored Amon's mausoleum but had informed Ember to excavate the tomb instead. Otherwise, Mr. Fool might have been replaced. Klein thought for a moment and asked with some hope, "Did you kill Eamon?" Ember shook his head and said, "His main body won't easily come to the North Continent, only some avatars. I can't even deal with an avatar." Klein mocked himself inwardly, then asked again without changing his expression, "What is the strength of Amon's avatars? If they were sequence 5, he might have a chance to clash with a single avatar." Ember glanced at Klein, seemingly seeing through his thoughts, and said directly, "Amon's weakest avatars are at least sequence 4, and each avatar has the ability to continue differentiating. They can even parasitize tiny, invisible organisms in the air. So." Ember paused, then continued, "If you accidentally encounter Eamon, my advice is to walk around." Klein immediately dismissed the trace of luck in his heart and nodded seriously without hesitation. His mood was heavy, even the weakest avatars were sequence 4 and could continue differentiating. Encountering them was definitely a dead end, and he wouldn't even know when he was parasitized. And once he was parasitized without knowing it, and returned above the gray fog in ignorance, the fool would definitely be replaced immediately. Moreover, I've been getting a bit arrogant lately. I'm only sequence 6, and I actually dared to think about clashing with Amon's avatars. Am I tired of living? Klein reflected on his pain and felt that this kind of emotion was truly undesirable. In the future, he must be cautious, and even more cautious in his actions. In short, one word, prudent. Ember gave Klein some time to process, then said, "The total value of this exploration is roughly £6,000. According to the agreement, you can get 1/10, which is £6,000. Do you want cash or equivalent Beander materials? Or Beander characteristics?" Klein thought for a moment and asked, "Do you have the Beander characteristic of a marionettist? Or the dust of an ancient wraith plus the core crystal of a 6-winged gargoyle?" "No," Klein said directly, "then cash it is." If he were still a magician, he might need the characteristic of a human-skinned wraith, but now he had become a faceless. Since he didn't have the Beander materials needed to advance to marionettist, other things were useless to him, it was more practical to just ask for cash. Ember nodded slightly. With a wave of his hand, as light flickered, a large number of Beander materials and Beander characteristics materialized on the table. He opened his mouth and said, "You can sacrifice these to Mr. Fool, and then bestow them upon Mr. Hanged Man. When Mr. Hanged Man sells them for cash, you can get your share from it." Hearing Ember's words, the corner of Klein's eye twitched. It was a good idea, and the logic was sound. After all, among the entire tarot club, only Mr. Hanged Man had the most abundant sales channels. It was best to hand these things over to him to sell. But the only problem was, he couldn't perform the sacrifice. Sacrifice must be two-way. Someone needed to perform the sacrifice ritual in reality, and someone needed to respond to the prayer above the gray fog. The act of sacrificing in reality could be performed by anyone else without problem, but not Klein. Because he was only one person, unable to split himself, he couldn't both sacrifice in reality and respond to the prayer above the gray fog. Of course, theoretically, he could perform the sacrifice ritual first, and then go above the gray fog to respond to the prayer. However, firstly, sacrifice is different from responding to requests, which can be delayed. The stable channel created by the sacrifice ritual can only exist for a very short time. This means that if he waited above the gray fog in advance, he would have to stay above the gray fog to stabilize the channel with spirituality. In that case, his real-world self couldn't complete the sacrifice. Of course, he also had other ways to do the same thing, which was to summon himself. But this involved the second problem: it was impossible for him to complete this set of operations in front of Ember. The corner of Klein's eye twitched slightly, wishing he could slap himself. If he had known this, it would have been better to meet Ember above the gray fog as Mr. World. How much safer and more convenient was online dating? Why did he have to meet in person when he had nothing else to do? Was he sick? But in the current situation, it was clearly a case of the arrow being on the string and having to be shot. Facing Ember's reasonable request, he simply couldn't refuse. Klein took a deep breath, his thoughts racing. He began to ponder countermeasures in his mind, and after a moment of contemplation, said, "No problem, but holding a sacrifice ritual here isn't very safe. Can you go outside and keep watch for me? I'll call you when I'm done." Klein didn't choose to use a subtle hint because he knew Ember had the ability to summon. If he was subtle, and Ember just sent a summoned creature outside to guard the door, wouldn't it be useless? Of course, stating it directly also carried risks, but at the moment, Klein clearly had no better options. All right. Facing Klein's request, Ember just nodded slightly, got up, and walked towards the door. Klein's hanging heart finally settled. Taking 3 steps as 2, feeling guilty like a thief, he stepped forward and locked the door. At the same time, he quickly pulled out a candle mixed with sandalwood from his pocket. This was originally for emergencies, and now it came in handy. Klein lit it casually with spirituality, considering the altar set up. I summon in my name. The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who holds good fortune. The sound of the incantation echoed within the small booth. Klein's spirituality surged out, blending with the candlelight to form a gray-white, palm-sized curtain of light. Immediately after, he took 4 steps backward against the roaring, and entered above the gray fog. Klein didn't dare to delay. He immediately responded to his summoning, and pushed open that mysterious door. After the chaos and dizziness, he saw that small but well-soundproofed booth, and he also saw himself. Klein half floated, half flew to the table, quickly wrapped the Beander materials and Beander characteristics on the table with his spiritual body, ended the summoning, and returned directly above the gray fog. And the moment he returned above the gray fog, Klein also quickly wrapped himself with spirituality and fell into the boundless gray fog, falling into the material world. Klein came back to his senses and let out a long breath. He wasn't in a hurry to extinguish the candle, nor was he in a hurry to call Ember in. Instead, he waited for a moment, estimating the time was right before getting up and walking towards the door. He grasped the doorknob and pulled gently, but the door didn't budge. Klein was startled for a moment, then realized he had locked the door from the inside earlier. Feeling awkward, Klein unlocked the door and gently pulled it open. Then he saw that Ember was not facing away from the door, but facing the booth's door, his gaze deep. At this moment, Klein even had the illusion of being completely seen through, but both Faceless and Clown could perfectly help him hide his emotions. So he didn't reveal the slightest flaw, just gave a barely perceptible nod. All right. As he spoke, he stepped aside to let Ember enter. As Ember walked towards the booth, he suddenly spoke. "I remember you still owe me 2 things, right?" Klein's face stiffened immediately, and he said helplessly, "That's right." Although £10,000 was not impossible for him to repay now, he didn't regret owing Ember these 2 things. After all, the value of the sacrifice ring was definitely far more than 10,000 pounds, that was a genuine resurrection. But being mentioned by Ember now, he couldn't help but feel awkward. After all, being in debt wasn't something glorious, just like the gains from this ancient tomb. Even if he got the money, he would have to rush to repay Miss Justice's debt. However, Ember suddenly bringing this up, did he need his help with something? As Klein was thinking this, he suddenly saw Ember nod slightly. He thought he would state his request, but there was no follow-up. The two of them just quietly drank their coffee. After finishing the coffee, they quietly bid each other farewell and left in opposite directions. Klein walked on the street, still somewhat doubting life. He didn't really see something, did he? The more Klein thought about it, the more something felt wrong. The more he thought, the more uneasy his mood became. In that moment just now, due to being too nervous, he had overlooked some details. For example, how did Ember discover those Aemon avatars parasitizing tiny organisms invisible to the naked eye? Klein actually had a guess about this, which was locking. But if it was really locking, then when Ember was facing the booth door just now, would he have also seen the fool's divine descent? Moreover, he could have actually completely refused Ember's request for an immediate prayer just now, using the excuse that he didn't have the materials to set up a ritual. But he forgot that he was only thinking about praying to himself. The ritual could be simplified as much as possible, a candle was enough, no need for a too complicated ritual. But in Ember's eyes, it was very likely that all of this was full of doubts. If he connected all of this, would he guess something? The more Klein thought about it, the more he suspected Ember had seen something, but it was impossible for him to go and ask Ember directly, which made his state of mind a bit frayed. Klein took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down and not think about these things. Whatever, if he saw it, he saw it. If he was seen through, he'd just give up. And didn't Ember not say anything? If he didn't see anything, that was naturally for the best. But if he saw something and still didn't say anything, wasn't that even better? That's right, there's nothing to worry about. Under a wave of self-consolation, Klein's mood calmed down a lot, which also made him subconsciously ignore the idea of divination. Instead, he quickly began to think about another question. Although Ember has already explored the mausoleum, others clearly don't know this. Should I sell this information to the machinery hivemind and get a reward from them? Although the Beander characteristics and such have been taken, there should still be some murals and texts inside, which are also very valuable. The machinery hivemind definitely won't refuse. Although these things can only bring in less than 100 pounds in reward, even a mosquito is meat. Moreover, this can also let the machinery hivemind people help with the cleanup. Perfect. He took a deep breath, took a carriage at the street corner, and headed straight for the Bravehearts bar in the Backland Bridge area. Blending in with the workers who finished work at noon, Klein ordered a glass of South Wales beer at the bar and got a lunch. He slowly finished his lunch, persevered in drinking the South Wales beer he ordered, and then slowly walked through the waves of cheers from boxers, left the bar, and got into a hired carriage. Feeling the rolling of the wheels, he deliberately closed his eyes. Suddenly, he heard a light tapping sound on the window. Klein's facial muscles twitched slightly. He opened his eyes and looked ahead, seeing the pale-faced, exquisitely beautiful Sharon already sitting quietly opposite him. Without waiting for the other party to ask, Klein smiled and said, "I sold the information you provided last time for a good price, the one about the Aemon family mausoleum." Sharon didn't speak, just quietly looked straight at him. Klein paused, then continued. "The total value is around 6,000 pounds. We'll each get 3,000 pounds. However, those things still need to be converted into cash, so you might have to wait for a while." She raised her head, said, and asked concisely, "What was in the mausoleum?" "Aemon." Klein's expression became solemn, and he said in a deep voice, "That was Amon's mausoleum, and Aemon was inside." Considering that Sharon was also an ally and had helped him a lot, Klein didn't hide too much. He only concealed some key information and told her everything related to Aemon. And Sharon didn't speak, just as always, rested her hand on her cheek and listened attentively. Klein wasn't surprised by this, because he knew that Miss Wraith seemed to have a hobby of watching theatrical scenes and listening to various rumors. Klein finally reminded her, "If you accidentally encounter him, be sure to walk around." Sharon's expression didn't change. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "Someone is digging a passage to the underground ruins." Klein didn't immediately react to what the other party was talking about. But soon he understood what the underground ruins in Sharon's words referred to. There was only one underground ruin that both of them knew about, which was the ruins of the Tudor dynasty from the 4th epoch, where a terrifying evil spirit existed. Someone was digging a passage, wanting to enter that underground building. Klein pondered for a few seconds, and suddenly an inspiration struck him. That Viscount. Sharon gave a positive reply. Suddenly, Klein had the urge to call Ember to excavate the tomb again. Chapter 155, Why do you use things others gave you? Night. Inside a quiet room in St. Samuel Cathedral. Leonard Mitchell, wearing a black trench coat and red gloves, with black hair and green eyes, pushed open the door and walked into the room. Dunn Smith, with deep gray eyes, was standing by the window, quietly looking at the red moon outside. Leonard walked into the room and said in a relaxed tone, "Captain, there's good news. Benson successfully passed the Government Employee Unified exam. They will come to Backland after the new year." Dunn turned around and said with a smile, "That is good news." Compared to Tingen, where the highest-ranking Deander was only Sequence 7, Backland, with a large number of mid-sequence and even high-sequence Beyonders stationed there, was undoubtedly safer. Especially after the last cleanup that cleared out a large number of rats hidden in the dark, Backland would undoubtedly be even safer. Most importantly, they were all here and could help look after them. Dunn thought for a moment and instructed, "When the time comes, try to arrange for them to stay in the North District." "I understand." Leonard nodded slightly. "The church has allocated a housing quota for each Nighthawk. My quota can be given to them." Although Klein's pension was a full £6,000, enough for Benson and his sister to live well, this didn't mean they could feel at ease. What they owed Klein was his life, which was far from something 6,000 gold pounds could compensate. Dunn nodded lightly but said nothing more. He just turned back to continue looking at the red moon outside the window, his lips curving up subtly. Leonard saw the curve of Dunn's lips from the side and asked strangely, "Captain, what are you smiling about?" Dunn chuckled. "I remembered something happy." He had met Sherlock twice. Once in a dream, investigating Dr. Allen's nightmare incident. The other time was a few days ago, when he was in charge of investigating Jason Buria, the assassin of Duke Negan. The results of these two meetings were completely different. The first time, he hadn't even suspected the striking resemblance between Sherlock and Klein, but the second time, he could see the similarities at a glance. There was only one explanation: the first meeting was in a dream, and he might have been blinded by some power, which was why he didn't notice anything. As for the second meeting, it wasn't in a dream, and this meeting was probably also unexpected for that Sherlock detective. More importantly, he had investigated that Sherlock detective and found that his earliest record was arriving in Backland on August 26 and renting the house at 15 Minsk Street. That day happened to be the day after Klein was buried. These might not be conclusive evidence, but they were enough for Dunn. He trusted his judgment. However, despite confirming these things, Dunn had no intention of acknowledging him. This was because, on one hand, Klein didn't seem to intend to acknowledge him. Whatever the reason, Dunn respected Klein's choice. Of course, Dunn believed it was highly likely because Klein felt he couldn't explain to the church how he had come back from the dead. Regarding this, Dunn also couldn't explain it. Therefore, he and Leonard also concealed their resurrection. On the other hand, the concern was because in Zangwill, the culprit who had almost caused an evil god to descend, was still alive. Having become Red Gloves, they were qualified to learn more about sealed artifact 008, especially since they were responsible for hunting down Ince Zangwill. To Ince Zangwill, who possessed 008, the every move of those in the know was under his surveillance. This meant they were almost completely transparent in Ince Zangwill's eyes. The only thing that could remain a secret was their thoughts. If he only met Sherlock Moriarty, Ince Zangwill wouldn't notice anything. But if he acknowledged Klein, then Ince Zangwill, who had personally killed Klein, would also know that Klein was alive. The fact that he could force Ince Zangwill to take action himself was enough to show how much he hated Klein. If Ince Zangwill knew Klein was still alive and also exposed the secret of Klein's ability to come back from the dead, it would undoubtedly make Klein's situation extremely dangerous. Therefore, before Ince Zangwill was completely apprehended, he would not attempt to acknowledge Klein, nor would he make any move that would expose Klein. Even when investigating Sherlock Moriarty, he investigated him along with other detectives involved with Jason Buria, so Sherlock's information was mixed in and not conspicuous. Of course, provided that all of this was due to his own will, and not coincidences created by 008. Outside Braveheart's bar, a hansom cab drove past briskly. Inside the carriage, Klein, wearing a semi-tall silk top hat, and Sharon, still in her black Gothic court dress, sat facing each other. Looking at the former bodyguard's expressionless pale face, Klein found it difficult to make small talk and could only get straight to the point. "I am ready." Sharon listened quietly, then spoke concisely. "Tonight, Her voice trailed up slightly to indicate she was asking a question. If you have no problem, then I have no problem either. Klein responded, having prepared for this. In fact, he had initially planned to call Ember to go grave digging with him. But considering that Sharon might not be very accepting of strangers participating, Klein abandoned the idea. After all, Sharon hadn't even called Marich, who was with her, so Klein couldn't just casually let others join. Moreover, having already advanced to Sequence 6 Faceless, and with several powerful mystical items in his possession, Klein wasn't entirely without confidence in exploring that underground ruin. Okay. Sharon nodded. The scene was silent for a few seconds. Klein pondered before asking again. Have you heard about mermaids? Do you know where to find such legendary creatures? Sharon looked at Klein without blinking her blue eyes, as if she had turned into a real doll. After a while, she said without any emotional fluctuation. There are no mermaids in places where human footprints can reach. Only the fishermen of the Gargaz archipelago, during their long voyages hunting white-tailed whales, occasionally hear the mermaids, singing in the storm. The Gargaz archipelago is located deep in the Sonia Sea, the furthest human settlement on this ocean, characterized by products like whale oil and whale meat. Similar to the information given by the hanged man, Klein felt a little regretful but still nodded lightly. I understand. Empress Burrow, Rohal's family's luxurious villa. Audrey, with a white napkin under her plate, watched the dining maid cut her steak, arrange the foie gras and tamagoyaki, spread jam on the soft bread, and add sauce to the roasted meat. The lavish dinner sparkled with tempting colors under the light of many candles. In true aristocratic families, maids were divided into many types. Besides personal maids, there were maids for different bedrooms, study maids, living room maids, guest room maids, clothing maids, shoe maids, jewelry maids, dining maids, laundry maids, kitchen maids, strictly corresponding one maid per task. Although this largely wasted manpower, for nobles, decorum was everything. They wouldn't lower such standards unless they were deep in debt. And Earl Hall, as one of the nation's largest bankers, clearly wasn't short of this money. Audrey took a sip of the reddish-brown tea, letting the faint malt and rose aroma linger in her mouth. Sitting next to her should have been her mother, Mrs. Caitlin, but now it was Ember. In fact, every time Ember dined at the villa, her mother would voluntarily sit on the other side to make room for Ember. As for the reason for doing so, both Audrey and everyone else were well aware of it. At this moment, she heard her father, a member of the kingdom's upper house and a prominent banker, Earl Hall, muttering to the newspaper in his hand. This is truly insane. Audrey blinked her eyes and asked curiously. Did the Aurora Order assassinate another envoy or duke? Besides the initial assassination of the Intis Republic's envoy, the deed of assassinating Duke Negan a few days ago was also attributed to the Aurora Order for some reason, and Earl Hall's reaction made it hard not to suspect if the Aurora Order had assassinated someone else. Oh, darling, you wouldn't want to know. This isn't an assassination this time. The Aurora Order robbed the mausoleum of a great noble from the Fourth Epoch. Earl Hall shook his head as he turned the newspaper pages, his tone even containing a hint of shared indignation. Hilbert Hall was slightly stunned. He swallowed the roasted mushroom in his mouth and asked in confusion. Which ancient noble's mausoleum was robbed? Unlike what newspapers and magazines imagined, dinners in great noble families were not serious and didn't require silence. This was a rare time for family members to gather. They ate while casually chatting about various light topics to exchange feelings and strengthen bonds. Earl Hall put down the newspaper, shook his head, and sighed. That mausoleum belongs to the Aemon family. Aemon. Ember was slightly startled, his action of cutting the steak paused for a moment. Oh, I did that, then it's fine. As for the Aurora Order taking the blame, well, it's actually quite good. The Aurora Order probably wouldn't care anyway, nor would it come out to clarify. Thinking this, Ember immediately continued cutting a piece of steak as if nothing happened, putting it into his mouth and letting the rich, delicious juice burst forth. Hearing this, Hilbert couldn't help but feel a little emotional, sighing. A once illustrious family, now long extinct, even their ancestors' mausoleum cannot rest in peace. The Fourth Epoch was the era before the current, Black Iron Age. Its history is full of mist and many gaps. Even unearthed mausoleums, ancient cities, and documents are extremely rare. Historians and archaeologists can only barely piece together a little of the original appearance by relying on the vague, faith education-focused theological texts of the seven great churches. And the Aemon family was one of the few recorded great noble families among them. It rose during the Fourth Epoch Tudor dynasty and was one of the 5 great families that supported the establishment of the Tudor dynasty. It is no exaggeration to say that the status of this family in the Tudor dynasty was even more prominent than that of Duke Negan, who was assassinated a few days ago. And today, thousands of years later, this once illustrious family no longer exists, and even after death, its graves are being dug up. As a fellow noble, Earl Hall naturally felt some anger, like a fox grieving the death of a rabbit. After all, although it is only the Aemon family's mausoleum that has been robbed now, who knows if it will be the Hall family's turn 100 years later. Audrey's heart stirred slightly, and she calmly cut a piece of steak from her own ranch, observed Earl Hall's expression, and asked without hiding her curiosity. Dad, even if the Aemon family's mausoleum is robbed, the murals inside should still help us understand the history of the Fourth Epoch, right? That's the key point. Earl Hall shook his head and said in a deep voice, the Aurora Order not only robbed the Aemon family's mausoleum but also installed a large amount of high-performance explosives afterward for demolition. Now the entire mausoleum has been completely destroyed. Everything that might contain historical value, including murals and ancient documents, has disappeared with the collapse of the mausoleum. Demolition. Audrey opened her mouth, clearly finding it hard to believe. Robbing graves is one thing, but why demolish it afterward? What kind of grave robbers do that? No, if it's the Aurora Order, maybe it really can do such a thing. After all, judging from the descriptions by Ember and others in the Tarot Club, the Aurora Order is clearly full of mentally unstable lunatics. Ember suddenly asked, when did this happen? Just this afternoon. Earl Hall pointed to the front page of the newspaper and sighed regretfully. The Steam Church's archaeological team discovered this mausoleum and was originally preparing to carry out protective repairs and archaeology on it. However, when they arrived, they found that the mausoleum had already been destroyed by the Aurora Order. If the archaeological team had arrived one day earlier, perhaps this wouldn't have happened. Oh, then it's fine. Ember's expression returned to normal. The collapse of the mausoleum was clearly unrelated to him. After all, his exploration was a few days ago, and although he did cause a little damage at the time. But it definitely wouldn't collapse, at least it was fine when he left. However, the Aurora Order is likely taking the blame. It probably doesn't even know where this mausoleum is. It's highly likely that the Steam Church's archaeological team accidentally caused the mausoleum to collapse, and then hastily reported it in the newspaper to shift the blame to the Aurora Order. After all, the mausoleum couldn't have been collapsed by the official archaeological team, right? So no matter what, the truth can only be that it was done by grave robbers like the Aurora Order. Hilbert said with some emotion while cutting his steak. Perhaps this is the turbulent autumn Rosal the Great spoke of. Duke Negan was assassinated twice, the envoy of the Intis Republic was also assassinated. 2 months ago the Orthodox churches even teamed up with the military and military intelligence 9 to clear out secret organizations, and now the mausoleum of a great noble from the Fourth Epoch has been destroyed. All of this gives a feeling of a storm brewing. Even those who don't know what's happening can keenly sense that something is not right. After all, newspapers in previous years were far from being as colorful as they are now. This is hard to describe as a coincidence. Earl Hall's knife and fork paused, and he instructed with a serious expression. Hilbert, Audrey, try to go out as little as possible during the period before the New Year's Eve party. Audrey whispered like an innocent girl. The weather is so cold, even if you tell me to go out, Dad, I won't. Earl Hall looked at Audrey with doting eyes, feeling a bit helpless at the same time. As for why it's limited to the New Year's Eve party, it's actually easy to understand. Because according to the customs of the Ruined Kingdom, nobles with fiefdoms will leave Backland one after another a week after the New Year's Eve ball, return to their territories, enjoy a pleasant country or castle life, and only return to the capital in June to begin their daily social activities. Of course, Earl Hall, being a powerful noble and a great banker, definitely has to travel back and forth between the two places frequently to handle affairs. But Audrey and Mrs. Caitlin don't have to follow, they can stay in the castle on the territory until June. Hearing this, Hilbert suddenly asked curiously. Ash, after the New Year's Eve party, are you planning to stay in Backland or return to your territory in Winter County? Ember thought for a moment and replied. I should be staying in Backland. Indeed, Hilbert teased, winter in Backland is already very cold. Although Eastchester County isn't very warm either, it's much better than Winter County. At least if I were put in Winter County, I definitely couldn't stay for a day. However, pausing, Hilbert gradually got to the point and said with a smile, why don't you come and visit our family's territory? The family's territory is quite large, and there are many villages and towns under its rule. At that time, you can also accompany Audrey on an outing and go hunting as well. I can consider it. Ember thought for a moment and nodded slightly, unsure if he genuinely thought so or was simply being polite. Audrey immediately understood Hilbert's hidden meaning, lowered her head appropriately, letting a faint blush appear on her fair cheeks. And this, without a doubt, made Earl and Mrs. Hall, who saw this scene, reveal a comforting ant-like smile. In the middle of William Street, there was an abandoned small church. Withered vines climbed all over the walls, and gray stones were scattered everywhere. Inside the small church, feces and debris were intertwined, with piles of stones and dry grass interspersed. Under the deep darkness and the dim crimson covering the edges, Klein and Sharon cornered the baronet who was trying to dig an underground passage to that underground ruin, Sir Rafty Pound. However, before they could say much, the baronet suddenly walked with a blank stare to a relatively intact stone wall, used force with his back and waist, and heavily smashed his head against it. Thump, thump, thump. He hit it 3 times consecutively, bleeding from his forehead, and fainted. Klein and Sharon simultaneously noticed the abnormality and each reacted accordingly. One caused the ruined small church to be bathed in crimson moonlight, while the other took out a verdigris-colored cross, ready to soak it in blood at any moment. Immediately after, the baronet who should have fainted climbed back up, his eyes inexplicably bloodshot. Rafty Pound raised his right hand, wiped his forehead, leaving his palm full of blood. He stuck out the tip of his tongue, licked the scarlet liquid, and said intoxicatedly, "Tudor's bloodline, truly delicious, simply intoxicating. This will maximally exceed the limit of my abhorrence, helping me briefly expand the boundary of the seal." Klein held the cross in one hand and asked with a slightly startled expression. The wraith inside the ruin. Streaks of blood ran down Rafty Pound's face, and he smiled terrifyingly. "You guessed." Rafty Pound's voice stopped abruptly. He suddenly stared intently at the cross in Klein's hand. In his pupils, the blood red had completely stained the whites of his eyes. Negative emotions like hatred, malice, and resentment surged out, turning into almost tangible needles that continuously invaded Klein's nerves. "Who gave you this?" Chapter 156. Klein, you wouldn't want. Who gave this to you? A terrifying and bone-chilling aura emanated from Rafty Pound's small body, accompanied by negative emotions so intense they almost solidified. It spread little by little throughout the entire church, quickly becoming thick and misty, like a continuous mountain range of icy terror pressing down. And meeting his blood-red eyes felt like being plunged into a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Klein clenched his teeth. The opponent's cold and vast negative emotions turned into countless needles, constantly eroding his mind like whispers and pollution, making his spirit like a solitary boat on a stormy sea, liable to be capsized by the surging waves and sink to the seabed at any moment. At this moment, his thoughts were completely chaotic, with no normal idea surfacing. But at this moment, Klein clearly realized that even though the wraith possessing Rafty Pound had been dead for who knows how many years, his essence was still that of a high-level mythical creature. Furthermore, this was definitely not something an ordinary saint could compare to. He was at least an angel of sequence 2 or higher. Because he had only felt a similar sensation when divining about the eternal blazing sun above the gray fog. And now without the protection above the gray fog, this feeling was even more direct. He even had to be thankful that the opponent had been dead for at least 1,000 years, otherwise he would have likely lost control due to the pollution. Because this was a rule he had summarized long ago, one should not look directly at a god. Fortunately, this pollution brought by the essence of a high-level being did not last too long. In just a few seconds, the negative emotions that had almost filled the entire church dissipated into nothingness. Rafty Pound still stood opposite them expressionlessly, his eyes completely blood-red. Klein finally caught his breath and subconsciously glanced at Sharon beside him. Her face had always been pale, but now it was even paler than before, and even her figure seemed somewhat illusory. Her condition was even worse than his own. Rafty Pound said in a chilling tone. "Answer my question, where did you get that thing?" Klein, who had finally recovered, gasped for breath, deliberately putting on a struggling, breathless appearance, and did not answer the opponent's question immediately. His brain, which had just regained clarity but still felt a stinging sensation, had no time to rest and began thinking non-stop about his current situation. His essence is that of a high-level mythical creature, but he has been dead for many years after all, and there are also the restraints of the seal, so he cannot maintain his influence for a long time. He probably wanted to talk to us properly at first, perhaps to entice us to help him break the seal. But after seeing this string of crosses, he suddenly went mad, and his mental state became extremely unstable. Without a doubt, he and the original owner of this string of crosses must have been enemies. Klein quickly sorted out all the clues he had. Under the wraith's blood-red gaze, before he became impatient, he took a deep breath and said, "This is spoils of war one took from someone else." As expected, Rafty Pound pressed on. "Who? Which faction does he belong to?" Klein quickly replied, Viscount Stratford, belonging to the Rune royal family. Rune royal family. Rafty Pound sneered, what sort of shady plot is that paranoid lunatic scheming now? Although his tone was still chilling, the blood red in Rafty Pound's eyes gradually receded. While his eyes were still bloodshot and looked terrifying, they were at least not like before, where even just meeting his gaze carried pollution that ordinary people could not bear. I bet right. Klein watched the wraiths change and instantly breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Paranoid lunatic, plot. It seems this wraith was likely murdered by the paranoid lunatic he mentioned during his lifetime and ultimately sealed in this underground ruin for over 1,000 years. As for the identity of that paranoid lunatic, Klein also had a guess. He was likely the organizer of the Twilight Hermit Order. This fit the intelligence he had gathered. The Twilight Hermit Order had been secretly interfering with the progress of history, making it conform to their own needs, so as to achieve their goals at a certain point. If the tide of the era did not proceed as they expected, they would exert all their efforts to reverse this trend. And this wraith before him was likely killed because he obstructed the tide of the era that the Twilight Hermit Order wanted 1,000 years ago. This was the same situation as Duke Negan, who was assassinated, but this wraith's rank was more than just a little higher than Duke Negan's. He had originally wanted to use the power of this radiant cross to fight the wraith, but it ended up almost killing him instead. Rafty Pound's emotions stabilized somewhat, changing from his previous madness. Instead, he sighed and said, Don't be nervous, I am just an innocent person who was harmed because of Alistair Tudor's ambition, trapped in that underground ruin for close to or over 2,000 years due to the restraint of the corpse. As you can see, the one who murdered me is that paranoid lunatic, which is why I was so extreme just now. However, since you are not one of that paranoid lunatic's people, there is room for cooperation between us. What do you want to do? Klein countered directly. I hope you can help me escape my predicament and become a free spirit. I swear, I will not harm innocent people. Rafty Pound looked at Sharon with his bloodshot eyes. You should be a wraith from the mutant pathway. The next step is a critical juncture to becoming a demigod. I don't know if you have the puppet potion formula, but I can help you obtain it, and even become a component of your ritual. This is the reward I promise. The wraith then turned to look at Klein. You also have a reward. It is an item that can be called magical and precious. Due to a certain level of attraction, its holder came to the underground palace and died beside the Tudor descendants. This is what it looks like. As he spoke, the wraith spread open his palm, allowing the crimson moonlight to condense into an image. Within the image was a normal-sized tarot card. The image on it was completely different from other types. Sitting in the chariot was not a king, but a male priest wearing a deep red robe. The priest's appearance was clearly Rosal Gustav. Klein's gaze shifted instantly, seeing the starlight in the upper left corner condense into a line of text. Sequence 0, Red Priest. The wraith gazed at Klein, a somewhat terrifying smile appearing on his face. Furthermore, if you let me leave, I might even be able to help you cause some trouble for that paranoid lunatic. Believe me, we have common interests in this matter. After all, you wouldn't want to see his plot succeed, would you? West End, inside a brightly lit villa-style house. Emmeline White picked up the glass containing the crimson liquid and drank a mouthful thirstily. Just then, the host of the evening's banquet, Casimir Odra, walked over with a wine glass and asked with a smile. Do you like the wine tonight? Of course, its owner is young enough and possesses good vitality. Emmeline straightened his back, adopting a noble posture. Judging solely from his appearance, Casimir Odra was a gentleman of great bearing, but Emmeline knew that he was already over 200 years old and had witnessed Intis under the rule of Rosal the Great in Intis. Later, because he lived too long and feared being discovered by his neighbors, he moved to Lowen. Hearing Emmeline's praise, he smiled and said, Yes, its owner is a young lady who was stabbed by a thief and nearly lost her life. Fortunately, she met me, and this is the necessary price she paid for her recovery. By the way, my grandfather wants to see you. Your grandfather? Emmeline was startled for a moment, then widened his eyes and said, Lord Nibs. Following the stairs down to the underground area, Emmeline White passed through several secret doors and entered a spacious grey hall. In the center of the hall lay a heavy coffin made of what looked like black iron, engraved with numerous symbolic patterns and magical markings. After Casimir Odra made a report, a deep, aged voice slowly emerged from within the coffin. Emmeline White, do you know why I summoned you? Respected Lord Nibs, I believe you intend to help me remove a psychological suggestion. Emmeline replied without hesitation. The underground hall fell silent for a brief moment. After several seconds, Nibs Odra, lying in the coffin, chuckled and said, That is one of the purposes, but it will not be me helping you. I have just awoken from a long dream, having received revelation from the ancestor. Ancestor he has revived. The one who exclaimed in surprise was not Emlyn, but Casimir Odra. Nibas ignored his grandson's questions and surprise, and said in a deep voice. Emlyn White, I have something to entrust to you now. Please speak, Emlyn said respectfully. Nibas Odra said in a serious tone. Doomsday is near, only flame and the fool can save the world. Therefore, you must find an opportunity to pray to the fool. Emlyn suspected he had misheard. Empress Burrow, inside the luxurious hall mansion. Shortly after dinner, Audrey hurried upstairs with Ember. Because the evening gown customized for Ember had been delivered to the villa, and the New Year's Eve party was approaching, Audrey needed to hurry up and to set the look for Ember. They all look good. Ember, which set do you prefer? Audrey sat on the cushioned chair, looking at Ember in a brand new gown, and asked with some indecision. The tailor designed a total of 3 gowns for Ember, and Audrey thought they were all excellent. But since Ember would be wearing it, she certainly had to ask for his opinion. Ember pondered for 2 seconds, not directly saying he felt there was no difference, but said tactfully. Any of them will do, I trust your taste. The only problem is, when Audrey heard the first half of the sentence, the corner of her mouth curved slightly with a hint of pride, but when she heard the second half, a look of doubt appeared. Ember awkwardly tugged at his tie and said, Can't this thing really be taken off? No. All right. Ember shrugged and didn't insist further. Honestly. Audrey looked at Ember's uncomfortable appearance and sighed, haven't you attended banquets before? Wearing a tie is basic etiquette. Ember asked puzzledly, but when I attended Viscount Glaint's banquets a few times before, wasn't there no requirement? Sletalin. Audrey was stunned for a while before finally realizing who Ember was talking about. She opened her mouth and said somewhat helplessly, That's Viscount Glaint. Don't you even remember his name? Close enough, Ember said casually, his tone unchanged, knowing who it is fine. Grelint will cry. Audrey complained, then continued, moreover, what Grelint held before were just salons, and the attendees weren't all nobles, so they weren't considered formal dinners. Plus, Grelint is quite casual by nature, so he didn't have very formal requirements for dress. What's more, he still wanted you to help him collect potion formulas, so he would be even less likely to criticize your informal attire. But this time we are attending the New Year's Eve party, and almost all the attendees are nobles. There must not be any flaw in the dress, otherwise why would we specially customize these gowns? All right, you've convinced me. Ember interrupted Audrey and said seriously, then let's go with the one I'm wearing. But even if I can't take off the tie, it's okay to tie it a little looser, right? Audrey opened her mouth, but eventually chose to give up and said helplessly. All right, but only a little bit looser. Woof woof. Just then, a dog's bark suddenly came from outside the door. It's Susie. Audrey's expression shifted slightly. She had deliberately left Susie downstairs before going up. Now that Susie had suddenly come up, it might be something urgent. Thinking of this, Audrey quickly walked to the door and gently pulled it open. Click. The golden retriever Susie walked into the room, squatted there steadily, and let out a howl, vibrating the surrounding air as she said. Audrey, Alfred is back. When? Audrey showed a look of surprise, but quickly realized something was wrong and frowned. Did you hear this from Dad and them? Why didn't he tell me directly? Isn't it a good thing that Alfred is back? Why couldn't he tell her directly? Susie explained. A week ago, Alfred sent a telegram saying he would return to Backland in a few days, but there has been no reply since then. Earl Hall originally thought Alfred was delayed due to a temporary urgent mission, but during the day he used his connections to check the army's transfer orders and confirmed that Alfred had already returned to Backland 3 days ago. Audrey's pretty face changed slightly, and she finally understood why Earl Hall didn't tell her directly. Even though Alfred had already returned to Backland, not to mention coming home to visit, he hadn't even sent a single telegram. It was really hard not to suspect that he had encountered some accident. Ember pondered for 2 seconds and asked, Has Earl Hall found anything? Yes. Susie nodded and said seriously. Earl Hall asked the Prime Minister to investigate, but according to the information the Prime Minister obtained, Alfred's transfer orders are directly handled by the royal family, and even he does not have the authority to view the specific information related to the royal family. Audrey pursed her lips slightly, feeling a sense of foreboding in her heart. Perhaps because Ember was about to make a move against the royal family soon, she was very sensitive to matters involving the royal family and had a very bad impression of them. She even subconsciously suspected that Ember's plan had gone wrong, but quickly dismissed this guess. Because Ember had only told her about this plan, it was impossible for it to be leaked. Moreover, if it really were leaked, they would be the ones in trouble, not just Alfred, who was still serving on the South Continent. And based on these speculations, it was easy to come to a conclusion. This is related to the content of the transfer order itself. Audrey immediately had an answer in her heart, but this only made her more confused. What special mission does the royal family need Alfred to complete? But why him? Ember suddenly asked. Do you want me to help investigate? Audrey hesitated for a moment, then gently shook her head. No, not for now. She knew Ember very well. If she let him handle it, he would definitely blow things up, because Ember usually just flips the table directly. But it shouldn't have reached that point yet. The royal family's purpose in finding Alfred might not be a bad thing. Let's wait 2 more days. Audrey hesitated for a moment and said softly, if it's really not a bad thing, there should be news within these 2 days. Earl Hall thinks the same way. Susie wagged her tail and explained seriously, he said he has investigated this far, and the royal family will definitely know. They should send someone to contact him within these 2 days. Klein and Sharon quietly left William Street, detouring to another block in the silent darkness. After Klein got into the hired carriage, Sharon appeared and sat opposite him. She stared at Klein without blinking, and asked in a faint, ethereal voice. Will you help it break the seal? No, Klein answered without hesitation, then counter-asked, what about you? Sharon shook her head, indicating she wouldn't either. Klein secretly breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. It has been dead for 2,000 years, and now it is just a remaining evil spirit. Dissipating or returning to the spirit world is the ending it should get. My idea is, when we reach high sequence, we will work together to eliminate it and give it true liberation. Although the rewards promised by the Red Priest card, the hidden history of the 4th epoch, and the evil spirit were very tempting, Klein did not trust it at all. The evil spirit and the Twilight Hermit Order might indeed be enemies, after all, its death must be related to this organization. And Klein is now vaguely standing on the opposite side of the Twilight Hermit Order, seemingly having common enemies and common interests. But often, the enemy of your enemy is not necessarily your friend. Klein had a premonition that if they really helped the evil spirit escape, it would attack them immediately. Sharon, Ed, giving the necessary response. Klein thought for a moment and asked, is the Wraith's corresponding sequence 4 really puppet? Sharon nodded. Do you have the potion formula or Beander materials? Klein asked thoughtfully. Sharon shook her head. Klein asked tentatively. I have a friend who might be able to get the puppet potion formula. Moreover, he has high sequence strength. Perhaps next time we can invite him to explore this underground ruin together. Sharon looked up at Klein, and after a long time, nodded slightly. Chapter 157. Is there a possibility, that it's your god? December 27th, another Monday. At 2:50 p.m., Klein arrived at the Fool on time and summoned the members of the Tarot Club. Audrey the Justice, sitting on the other side of the bronze long table, originally intended to greet Mr. Fool and everyone else cheerfully and lightly as usual. But her gaze swept across, and she immediately noticed that Little Sun's mood was off, so she immediately asked. Mr. Sun, what happened? The exploration of the Temple of the Fallen Creator did not go smoothly. Derek the Sun seemed to have grasped hope, and quickly described in detail his exploration of the temple, encountering a little boy named Jack, and subsequently falling into a loop. After the chief eliminated that little boy, we all closed our eyes, and then woke up in the camp outside the city, preparing to start a new exploration, with no memory of what happened before. This process repeated 5 times, with only slight differences in details. If Mr. Fool hadn't reminded me, I wouldn't even know that I had been living a repetitive life during this time. He naturally assumed that the extra memories he gained after coming to the Fool were due to Mr. Fool's reminder, so he stood up and bowed solemnly to the blurry figure sitting at the head of the bronze long table. I only understood what happened after hearing your description. Klein the Fool said he was completely bewildered. He then turned to the others and sincerely asked, do you know the root of the problem? How to solve it? Mr. Sun. Alger the Hanged Man pondered for a moment, then hesitated and said, that little boy, Jack, is very likely the key to this loop. He paused, first analyzed Sun's situation, then said in a deep voice, also, I was once ordered to pursue a listener of the Aurora Order at sea. His goal in going out to sea was to find the sanctuary of the true creator. That listener also brought his child, whose age is very close to the Jack Sun described. Audrey the Justice was the first to react, blurting out in astonishment. Mr. Hanged Man, you suspect these two are the same person? Yes. Alger the Hanged Man nodded slightly, saying without hesitation, originally, I was just a little suspicious, but Lover has confirmed my guess. The end of the Sonia Sea is the legendary land abandoned by God, which completely matches the route of that listener. Derek Thiessen. Derek felt a surge of joy upon hearing this. Although he didn't doubt Lover's statement, there were no actual examples yet, and the only one who had come to the land abandoned by God, Lover, relied on Mr. Fool. But the appearance of this Jack truly meant that the two worlds were connected. As if seeing through Sun's thoughts, Alger the Hanged Man glanced at him and poured cold water on him again. Of course, if simply crossing the Sonia Sea could reach the land abandoned by God, then the land abandoned by God would have probably been discovered long ago. I suspect that certain conditions need to be met, and these conditions are very strict. So it's still a bit too early to consider these things now. The focus is still on solving the trouble you are encountering. My suggestion is, you can find an opportunity to mention the Sonia Sea, the Ruined Kingdom, and port cities in front of the little boy Jack. Maybe there will be a different reaction. Of course, try to avoid your Silver City's chief. Also, the key point is not necessarily on the little boy Jack. You should also consider other possibilities. Tell us the specific situation, such as the detailed content of the murals, and maybe we can find something useful. Sun silently noted these down, nodded solemnly, and then turned to Ember, apologizing. Mr. Lover, I originally planned to return to Silver City to look through the classics after exploring the temple, but now we are trapped here. I'm sorry, I may not be able to give you the information you want in a short time. A thought simultaneously appeared in the minds of Hanged Man, Justice, and the others. He's such an honest child. He's already in danger himself, yet he's still thinking about this matter. It's okay. Ember waved his hand to indicate that he was not in a hurry, and said, the temple itself is also part of the commission. You can first talk about your exploration experience. Perhaps, this will also help you get out of your current predicament. Okay. Sun no longer hesitated, and with the help of Mr. Fool, he materialized the scenes he could recall one by one, showing the process of the exploration and what he considered to be the key points to the others in a fragmented way, and then supplemented it with some explanations. And among those murals, there was one that Sun considered a key mural. A pure white cross stood in the center, surrounded by black, like seawater, drowning many humans who struggled to reach out their arms. On the cross was the hanged, fallen creator. The rusty iron nails, bloody stains, and the statue outside were no different. But in this mural, the fallen creator was being eroded by the blackness, so much so that parts of the cross's whiteness had turned black. In addition, the cross supported a hazy land, and countless humans were kneeling and praying to the fallen creator. Around the picture, in the deepest part of the darkness, 6 figures like evil gods were hidden. Sun explained seriously. The meaning of this mural is that the great cataclysm came, and the evil gods crawled out of the abyss. The fallen creator, in order to save the world, bore most of the sin and suffering, and thus appeared to be eroded and had a changed appearance. Alger the Hanged Man listened quietly, looking at the octopus-headed monster wrapped in lightning, stepping on black waves, wearing a bird feather cloak, and holding a trident, and inexplicably had some associations in his heart. He immediately pointed to that figure and asked curiously, which evil god recorded in your Silver City's classics is this? Derek Thiessen. Derek shook his head honestly. I don't know. I thought you would recognize it. Justice looked at the appearance in the mural and frowned. Among the evil gods circulating in the North Continent, there is no similar image. This. Klein was a little surprised. This was very similar to the statues of the 6 gods he saw in the underground ruins of the Tudor family. It was just that the ones there were the normal version, while these were the blackened, distorted, fallen plus version. Especially the Earth Mother, the Lord of Storms, and the eternal blazing sun, they were not only blackened into evil gods, but more like ugly monsters. Klein thought for a moment, wanting to reveal this information to others, but felt that the fool was not suitable to say it. But just as he was about to control Mr. World to speak, he heard other people's voices. It was the Hanged Man. The Hanged Man felt inexplicably familiar, but couldn't connect it, and couldn't help but ask hesitantly. Mr. Lover, do you have any clues? Ember pointed to the octopus-headed monster that the Hanged Man was paying attention to, and said, is there a possibility, that this is the Lord of Storms? The Hanged Man's pupils suddenly constricted, and he turned his head sharply to look at that mural, looking at the image of the figure wrapped in lightning, stepping on black waves, wearing a bird feather cloak, and holding a trident. If the octopus head monster were removed, wouldn't this represent the authority of the Lord of Storms? The Hanged Man murmured in a low voice. It's so similar, yet I didn't connect the two immediately. He was a member of the Storm Church, yet he had just pointed at the image of the Lord of Storms and called it an evil god. Alger's heart trembled. Even though his faith was not very devout, this was still enough to make him feel lingering fear. No, it would be strange if you could connect them, okay. Audrey complained inwardly. How blasphemous must one's thoughts be to connect a distorted monster with the god one believes in? The fact that the Hanged Man couldn't overlap the two images didn't precisely show that his faith in the Lord of Storms was devout enough. Well, that's not right either. After all, Mr. Hanged Man's faith in the Lord of Storms doesn't seem to be that devout either. Mr. World suddenly spoke in a hoarse voice. I have seen similar statues. After attracting everyone's attention, he paused and added. During an adventure exploring a fourth epic ruin, he pretended to make a request to Mr. Fool, and after getting permission, he materialized the statues of the 6 gods and their corresponding holy emblems that he had seen one by one. Unlike the chaotic and distorted images in the mural, the images of the 6 statues he materialized were quite sublime. It was evident that the sculptors of these statues carved them with reverence for the gods. And among these 6 statues, the image of the Lord of Storms was that of a majestic middle-aged man wearing black armor, stepping on waves, surrounded by storms, with lightning on his back, and holding a trident. The overall symbolism of the statue and the image in the mural were similar, but the appearance was distorted into an octopus-headed monster. However, if this monster is the Lord of Storms, then what about the others? Audrey subconsciously looked at the upper left corner of that mural. In the upper left corner was a lady wearing a black classical long dress. Her clothes were layered but not complicated, inlaid with many star-like rays of light. Her body was relatively ethereal, with signs of rippling outwards. Her face was blurred, as if she was wearing a mask without facial features. Around her, the darkness was surging, and strange eyes were faintly visible. Blasphemy. This is blasphemy against the goddess. Audrey was suddenly a little angry. Although her faith in the goddess had also been affected by Ember, this did not prevent her from being angry at this act of distorting the goddess's image. But she quickly calmed down, because after all, this was the mural of the fallen creator, and it would be strange if he didn't distort the images of the 6 gods. Furs couldn't help but ask. Then are these 6 evil, are they the 6 gods? The Hanged Man had recovered his composure and nodded gently. If there are no surprises, it should be like this, but this is the temple of the fallen creator after all, and the fallen creator has always been hostile to the 7 gods' churches. It's not strange for him to distort the images of the 6 gods into evil gods. Then why is the steam and machinery god not there? Ember glanced at Furs and explained. The steam and machinery god was not born until the 4th epic, and this mural should depict the scene in the early 3rd epic. I see. Furs felt inexplicably guilty, because she hadn't seriously read the steam and machinery canon, and her faith was more of a habit. Audrey hesitated and asked, then the content of this mural should be completely unbelievable, right? Ember thought for a moment and said, the mural distorts the images of the 6 gods, but it is a fact that the 6 gods are hostile to the fallen creator. Moreover, judging from the degree of distortion of the images of the 6 gods, the fallen creator's hostility towards the 6 gods is not entirely the same. The images of the Lord of Storms and the eternal blazing sun are the most distorted, followed by the goddess of the night, the harvest goddess, and the god of knowledge and wisdom, while the image of the war god is hardly distorted at all. Everyone was attracted by Ember's words and looked again at the mural materialized by Sun and the statue materialized by Mr. World. The eternal blazing sun in the statue is a young man in a pure white robe, holding the Book of Covenant in one hand and a golden ball like the sun in the other. He is handsome and vigorous, but in the mural, he is a young male in a pure white robe. His face is painted pure gold, and he has tentacles like rays of light growing out. His hands hold a corrosive green book and a spear condensed from light respectively, and his chest and back are inverted. As Ember said, the images of the eternal blazing sun and the Lord of Storms are the most distorted. Next is the god of knowledge and wisdom. Its image in the statue is an old man holding a book in the all-seeing eye, wearing a hood, only revealing his mouth, wrinkles, and long white beard. And his image in the mural is also similar. At first glance, it seems normal, but the smile on his mouth has an indescribable evilness. Another example is the harvest goddess. In the statue, she is a plump and gentle lady, with wheat ears growing at her feet, surrounded by springs, her dress flowing outwards, adorned with various herbs and flowers, and depicting images of different animals. The lady's chest is high, and she holds a cute baby in swaddling clothes in her arms. The overall image is holy and dignified. In the mural, her figure is still plump and gentle, but her chest is high and exposed outside her clothes. In her arms she holds a baby with a rotten face, at her feet are black wheat ears, springs with wriggling flesh, herbs flowing with pus, and animals mating wildly. As for the war god, the images in the 2 pictures are the closest, and there is almost no distortion. In the statue, he is a warrior seated on a throne, with his long sword resting in front of him. His face is hidden behind a faceplate, and his full armor has an indescribable sense of dilapidation, and in the mural, he is a giant warrior in dilapidated armor. He rests his long sword and sits on a throne, with a desolate twilight in the background. But when the members of the Tarot Club compared the two pictures, they still had deep doubts. The war god's image is indeed the most normal, there is no doubt about that. And the Lord of Storms and the eternal blazing sun are the most distorted, which is also correct. But why did Ember think that the goddess of the night, the harvest goddess, and the god of knowledge and wisdom were in the second tier? The goddess of the night and the god of knowledge and wisdom are fine, but the degree of distortion of the harvest goddess's image, no matter how you look at it, is on the same level as the Lord of Storms and the eternal blazing sun, right? In fact, in some ways, her image is even more distorted than the Lord of Storms and the eternal blazing sun. Wait, Audrey suddenly exclaimed, Mr. Lover, you just said, harvest goddess. Isn't this the Earth Mother? Furs and Hugh, and Alger, and even Klein were all suddenly enlightened at this moment. They had all been led astray by Ember just now. They subconsciously substituted the image of that lady for the harvest goddess, almost forgetting that there was no harvest goddess among the 6 gods, it should be the Earth Mother. Ember was stunned for a moment before realizing that he had mixed them up, and said casually, It's the same. Little Sun still didn't understand the situation and weakly raised his hand and asked, Harvest goddess, isn't that the giant queen? Closing curly bracket. Chapter 158, I saw a snake. In the records of the Silver City, the harvest goddess was the giant queen. And the Sun remembered Ember saying that the harvest goddess's real name was Omibella, which was a part not recorded in the Silver City. From the history of both sides, the harvest goddess and the Earth Mother should have absolutely no connection. After all, one was the queen of the giant king in the second epic, while the other was one of the 7 orthodox gods of the North Continent. Even Derek himself would not confuse the two, but at this moment, Ember clearly confused them, and this could only explain one problem. Whether it was the hanged man Alger or Justice Audrey, or Furzan Zio, or even the fool Klein, at this moment, their minds were left with only one thought. In Ember's eyes, the harvest goddess is equivalent to the Earth Mother. The Earth Mother, one of the 7 gods, is Omibella, the former giant queen of the second epic. This piece of information inadvertently revealed by Ember stirred up waves in the hearts of the members of the Tarot Club, leaving them unable to calm down for a long time. A god who had lived from the second epic to the present, a god who had risen from an angel to a true god, it was as if ancient history had walked into reality, giving them a feeling of blurred history and present, reality and illusion. Furthermore, if the Earth Mother was the giant queen of the second epic, then were the 7 gods, or rather, the 6 gods excluding the Lord of Steam and Machinery, all gods that had survived from the second epic. At the moment this thought surfaced, everyone felt that their thoughts were somewhat blasphemous, and they trembled because of it. It was a fear originating from the great power of the gods. But besides the trembling, the thoughts in their minds became increasingly blasphemous. They began to compare the images of the 6 gods one by one with the ancient gods, trying to find a match. No wonder. The hanged man Alger murmured in a low voice, no wonder in the War of Betrayal more than 600 years ago, the Fursak Empire stood on the side of the Fenboot Kingdom. So it was because the gods they believed in were all giants. Audrey also immediately reacted upon hearing this. The giant queen was undoubtedly a giant. And in the mural, the only normal image of the war god was also a giant. And as gods of the giant race, it was no wonder that the countries that believed in them historically maintained a high degree of consistency in many cases. Audrey felt her thoughts becoming increasingly blasphemous, but her mood changed from the initial trembling and fear to becoming increasingly bold. Of course, she knew that such blasphemous thoughts were not advisable, but the hidden knowledge she had come into contact with made her unable to stop thinking in this direction. What's more, she wasn't the only one with such blasphemous thoughts. What she could think of, others could also think of. When it came to blasphemy against the gods, none of the people present here could escape. Klein took a deep breath and calmly analyzed in his heart. There shouldn't be any ancient gods remaining among the 6 gods. After all, according to the records in the Silver City, the ancient gods have all had their authorities reclaimed by the Creator, and they are bound to die. The existing 6 gods should all be subordinate gods from the second epic. Although they are not ancient gods, this is still astonishing enough. Audrey also frowned and thought. But the question is, why would the 6 gods unite to fight against the Creator? Could it be? Audrey's expression changed drastically, because according to the Silver City's records, the Creator reclaimed all authorities, which are the extraordinary characteristics. And for the subordinate gods of the second epic to become sequence 0 gods, they must have the corresponding authority. In other words, the 6 gods joining forces against the Creator was likely because they wanted to plunder authority from the Creator. Audrey was startled by her own speculation and looked at the others with a guilty conscience. Then she found that Mr. Hanged Man also looked at the others, as if both of them had the same speculation and were equally guilty. No, it shouldn't be like this. Audrey took a deep breath and quickly refuted her speculation, not only because this thought was too blasphemous but also because of the difference in strength. The Creator possessed all authorities, and the 6 gods, who were only subordinate gods at that time, were simply not enough to kill the Creator. There must be a deeper reason for this. Mr. Sun, the Hanged Man Alger suddenly said, that mural might be the key to breaking the situation. You can try to destroy it, but don't let your chief suspect you. Mr. Hanged Man is a little guilty. Is he trying to change the subject so that others won't continue thinking along this line? In that case, it seems that even Mr. Hanged Man's faith is more devout than mine. Audrey keenly noticed the abruptness of the Hanged Man's change of subject and immediately guessed the reason for his action. But at the same time, the girl was a little sad. She clearly used to be so devout in her faith in the goddess, but now, whenever she thought of the goddess, her mind was filled with related blasphemous thoughts. Why did it turn out like this? Okay, thank you for your reminder, Mr. Hanged Man. You are always so kind and enthusiastic. Also, Mr. Lover, Miss Justice, Miss Magician, Miss Judgment, Mr. World, you are all equally kind. Kind, enthusiastic. The Sun's innocence left the Hanged Man unsure how to react for a moment, as he simply wanted to change the subject. Klein was also eager to change the subject at this time. He was also afraid of attracting the attention of those few. After all, the Grey Fog was not the first time it had been invaded. First, it was invaded by the goddess, then the eternal blazing sun, and recently there was Aemon. This indicated that the Grey Fog was not as impregnable as he thought, but had the possibility of being invaded by gods. Although their conversation here should not be eavesdropped on, it was better to be safe than sorry. His mind was full of blasphemous thoughts related to the goddess just now. If the goddess knew about it, wouldn't he be completely annihilated? Klein thought nervously, feeling that he should do something to completely end this topic. Thus, the fool, seated on the high-backed chair, leisurely adjusted his posture, lightly tapped the edge of the mottled long table with his fingers, and chuckled. Redemption Rose. Redemption Rose. Is this the key to getting out of the predicament? Oh, there is this name in the corner of a mural above the temple. Thiessen, Derek seemed to understand something, and the Hanged Man also immediately began to enthusiastically help the Sun discuss how to resolve his current predicament, following the topic. And the topic was successfully changed, from the original blasphemy against the gods to discussing how to help Derek escape the predicament. Well, although this was the main business, the blasphemy against the gods was actually off topic. Soon, after this matter came to an end, the tarot gathering continued according to the usual procedures. After several people led by Audrey each contributed several pages of Russell's diary to the Fool, the Tarot Club tacitly chose to remain silent, giving the time to the Fool. And in the diary contributed by Miss Audrey, the Fool saw Russell who was about to become a demigod, and also saw his obsession with building Gundams, and at the same time, he saw the miraculous experience of having countless affairs and almost being anally violated, which made the corners of Klein's mouth slightly rise. This was definitely not because of Schadenfreude. Then, he calmly looked at the last entry on the last page. April 26, Cheritu came to visit. I deliberately found an opportunity to ask, what is a miracle? He asked me back, what do you think? I think there is only one kind of miracle in my heart, and that is a wonder of civilization, such as the Dusk Temple of the Fursak Empire, the former residence of giant King Olmir. Cheritu finally gave a direct answer. He said, what is a miracle? Resurrection from the dead is a miracle. Klein was silent for a long time, muttering to himself in his heart. Miracle awe. Cheritu was undoubtedly from the diviner pathway, and at least a high-level angel of Sequence 2. And the Sequence 2 of the diviner pathway was Miracle Invoker. Cheritu explicitly stated that, resurrection from the dead is a miracle, which means that, resurrection from the dead, is likely a high sequence ability of the diviner pathway, and it is very likely the extraordinary ability of the Sequence 2 feat Miracle Invoker. And the reason he was able to possess this miracle before becoming an extraordinary was likely related to this mysterious space above the Grey Fog. These were actually not too surprising discoveries. After all, Klein had speculated about this a long time ago. After all, he didn't think he had the ability to resurrect from the dead. This ability could only have come from above the Grey Fog. However, miracle awe. Klein glanced at Ember, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly. Cheritu probably wouldn't have thought that miracles can actually be cheaply mass-produced. Klein was well aware that the miracles he possessed were by no means infinite and definitely had a limited number of uses. But for Ember, the miracles he had were almost infinite. For example, Ember's sacrifice ring itself was a type of miracle, and he possessed many similar miracles. For example, the farewell tears, with similar effects, which could be used continuously as long as there was enough MP. However, in addition to the miracle of resurrection from the dead, the Grey Fog held even greater significance for Klein. Klein shifted his gaze from Russell's diary and became increasingly expectant of what he would discover in the veiled place after he advanced to a high-sequence powerhouse and the glowing stairs deep within the Grey Fog were complete. Perhaps he could find the reason for his transmigration there, find the way home. Klein suppressed the excitement in his heart and continued to read the next page of Russell's diary. April 21st, I saw the abyss. Klein's mood became excited once again. He had seen similar sentences before, in previous entries of Russell's diary. However, that time the diary entry stopped abruptly at this sentence, but this page started with this sentence. Perhaps it was because a later transcriber copied the contents of 2 pages together. But regardless, this meant that Klein had a chance to see the truth of history. With an excited heart, Klein continued to read. I saw the abyss, saw the fall of a god. Klein's expression changed slightly. What on earth did Emperor Russell experience? Klein couldn't imagine, but he couldn't suppress his curiosity and couldn't help but continue reading. April 22nd, we prepared to enter there, to explore the abyss. April 23rd, we followed the dark ocean, penetrated the liquid-like mist, and arrived at that mountain peak that resembled a monster. Behind it was an endless expanse of black mist, as if they covered a continent. However, if you looked at the bottom of the mountain peak, you would feel that there was no end, no limit. I joked to Edwards at the time, if I were to jump off a cliff here, I might never reach the ground, but would always be falling. Upon seeing this, Klein almost raised an eyebrow, finding it hard to believe that Russell, after seeing the abyss, would dare to organize his knights and sailors to explore the border area. However, up to this point, it was just normal exploration. Although it was courting death, it was still somewhat normal. April 24th, we descended the mountain peak, attempting to go deeper. The thick black mist was cold and slippery, as if it could permeate flesh and soul. Haha, fortunately, certain items on the Black Throne were effective in resisting this corrosion, otherwise I suspect that I and my Apocalypse Knights would all turn into members of the Frankish dance troupe. It's very quiet here. We didn't find anything. April 25th, we saw demons, but they were only rotten corpses. Behind the rugged black rocks, beneath the mud that was difficult to call a road, in various normal or unimaginable places, there were different demon corpses. It was as if they had all suffered the same death at the same moment. April 26th, either corpses or silence, there is never an end ahead. The items on the Black Throne are starting to show signs of corrosion. I've rarely felt scared in recent years, but here, that unknown fear is like an invisible hand, tightly squeezing my heart. Must leave. Must return. Cannot stay any longer. I saw a snake that came from the celestial. He descended into the abyss, he ate the god of the abyss. Klein's pupils contracted sharply. A snake ate a god. What kind of snake could eat a god? No, that was definitely not an ordinary snake, it was very likely another true god, but with the body of a snake. Just like the ancient gods of the Second Epic, weren't none of them human. But the problem was, neither the North Continent nor the land abandoned by God seemed to have any records of a snake-shaped god, not even a subordinate god. It couldn't be that snakes were devolved dragons, could it? Moreover, Russell the Great's diary explicitly stated that this snake came from the celestial. This indicated that he likely witnessed a giant snake engaging in a battle with the god of the abyss right before his eyes and ultimately devouring him. From Russell the Great's diary, the last few sentences were somewhat disjointed, indicating that Russell was definitely very panicked at the time. The handwriting was also quite messy, and some traces clearly showed that his hand was trembling when he wrote. This page of Russell's diary is probably not a transcribed copy, but part of the real diary. It seems the starry sky is very dangerous. Klein's eyelids twitched. Mr. Dorr was also in the celestial, and couldn't find his way back. And the members of the Abraham family were also tormented by whispers because of this. But logically speaking, a being like Mr. Dorr, who was close to the strength of a god, shouldn't be unable to find his way back. This was likely because he was entangled by some existence. And now there was a snake that came from the celestial, and without a word, it directly ate a god. Although he didn't know who the god of the abyss was, it was a genuine god after all, and definitely not much weaker than the 7 orthodox gods worshipped in the North Continent. The fact that even a god could be eaten meant that the hidden dangers in the starry sky were probably no less than in reality. Chapter 159, The Gathering Storm. A god who can devour the abyss, the snake that Russell the Great saw was conservatively estimated to be a true god of sequence 0. As for the devoured god, it should refer to the cosmic dark side. But doesn't this mean that as early as over 100 years ago, the cosmic dark side was already dead? Klein immediately felt a chill run down his spine. During the Fourth Epoch, human forces that worshipped demons formed a loose alliance called the Blood Sect. The god worshipped by the Blood Sect was the cosmic dark side, who ruled and dominated the abyss. They believed the cosmic dark side was the destroyer who would inevitably erode and corrupt the entire real world and the vast universe. Within the 7 Orthodox gods' churches, the cosmic dark side has always been regarded as an evil god on par with the original witch and the true creator. This means that perhaps even the 7 gods didn't know that the cosmic dark side had been devoured over 100 years ago. While feeling a chill, Klein also had a headache. This was because the description of the 2 gods in Rosel's diary was too brief, making it impossible to extract much useful information. Klein even suspected that what Rosel the Great saw at that time might not have been a battle between true gods, but between angels. After all, Rosel the Great at that time should not have become a demigod, at most only sequence 5. It was possible for him to mistake a battle at the angel level for one between true gods. After all, if it was truly a battle between true gods, how did Rosel, an extraordinary who wasn't even a demigod, escape? Perhaps even the aftershock of the battle would have killed him instantly. What's more, with Rosel the Great's personality, if he had truly witnessed the fall of a god. After leaving, he would most likely boast about his legendary experience everywhere, and the death of the cosmic dark side would not have remained a secret until now. Unless, Klein's expression changed drastically, as he thought of an incredibly terrifying possibility. Unless Rosel the Great didn't escape at all, but was released by that snake. Rosel the Great likely had a conversation with that true god-level snake, which is why he was released, and why he was able to keep the secret afterwards. He was probably placed under some restriction by that true god-level snake, preventing him from revealing everything he saw in the abyss. If this were the case, then some things would have a good explanation. For example, why did Rosel the Great describe the snake as coming from celestial, rather than descending from the sky? After all, flying is not difficult for saints and angels. With Rosel the Great's strength at the time, he couldn't have observed whether the snake flew from a distance or came from celestial, especially since he was in the abyss at the time. And there is only one possible source for his detailed description in the diary of the snake, coming from celestial. The snake said it himself. And Rosel the Great's diary about this experience was likely supplemented after leaving the abyss. The first part describes exploring the abyss, and the latter part directly reveals the existence of the snake. This was likely a form of probing, testing how much information related to it he could reveal. That's why his handwriting was quite messy, and his fear at the time could be seen between the lines. He really keeps courting death. The corner of Klein's eye twitched slightly. Even at this point, he still dared to constantly test the bottom line of a true god. Emperor, you are truly brave. Klein put down the diary, and thoughts boiled in his mind, but he spoke calmly as if nothing had happened. You can start trading. Mr. Lover. The Hanged Man was the first to speak. Is there any news about the Ocean Singer potion formula? Ember nodded slightly and said concisely. Yes, 5,000 pounds. Deal. The Hanged Man replied immediately without any hesitation. A Sequence 7 potion formula only costs 800 pounds, but a Sequence 6 potion formula costs less than 2,000 pounds. However, Sequence 5 potion formulas are quite rare, usually only mastered by core members of major factions. Therefore, on the market, the price of a Sequence 5 potion formula ranges from 4,500 to 7,000 pounds. And the price of 5,000 pounds is in the lowest range, so the Hanged Man had no reason to refuse. The only problem was that even at 5,000 pounds, it was not a small sum, and Alger currently didn't have that much money. Because even though he helped Ember sell the corpses of those extraordinary creatures, he only earned a total of 20,000 gold pounds during this period. His intermediary fee and commission were 2,000 pounds. Even with some savings and income from other businesses, the total only added up to 3,000 pounds. In the past, he would have had to find a way to raise money quickly, but now he had a better option. Miss Justice. The Hanged Man turned his gaze to Audrey and said, I hope I can borrow 2,000 gold pounds. Audrey showed a sweet smile and replied quite easily. No problem, but I hope Mr. Hanged Man can help me get the fruit of the illusory wind chime tree as soon as possible. Okay. The Hanged Man readily agreed. The fruit of the illusory wind chime tree is an extraordinary material at the Sequence 6 level, with a price around 2,000 pounds. As long as he could obtain the fruit, he could repay Miss Justice's debt, which was why he dared to borrow money. After the 3 parties completed their transactions, Klein controlled Mr. World to speak in a hoarse voice. Still the same as before, the extraordinary characteristics of a marionettist, or the dust of an ancient wraith plus the core crystal of a six-winged gargoyle. The hanged man said without hesitation. I don't have these materials, but I have clues about mermaids. Some sailors revealed that their fleet sailed eastward from the Gargaz archipelago for about a week and encountered many communities of mermaids. They attempted to capture one to sell to a local great noble, but none were successful. Klein's expression shifted slightly. This was similar to Sharon's information, but more detailed. Mr. World's voice was hoarse. What reward do you need? None. The hanged man shook his head and said concisely, free. Mr. World looked at him deeply, knowing that the hanged man didn't want to be too disconnected from the Tarot Club. After all, the others had previously revealed some very important information for free. The hanged man didn't want to appear too mercenary, so he also needed to occasionally reveal some information to others for free. What's more, this piece of information itself wasn't worth much money, so it was better to do a favor. Mr. Lover. Mr. World then turned his gaze to Ember, speaking hoarsely. I recently discovered an underground ruin, the one with the 6 statues. A high-sequence evil spirit is sealed within it. He might have some conflict with that organization. Are you interested? Underground ruin. Ember showed a thoughtful expression, pondered for 2 seconds, and slowly said, wait for a while. After I finish what I'm busy with, I can take some time to explore. Okay. Mr. World nodded slightly. Klein knew what Ember was busy with, assassinating George III. After all, Ember had asked for his stance on this matter before, and his purpose was not hard to guess. Since that evil spirit had a grudge with the Twilight Hermit Club, the Twilight Hermit Club had no reason not to continue paying attention to him. If Ember rashly went to explore the underground ruin, it was likely to alert the Twilight Hermit Club. That could trigger a chain reaction, perhaps even causing the royal family to react in advance, which would be unfavorable to Ember's original plan. Because it was already December 27th, only 3 days until the New Year's Eve party. Whatever changes occurred before then had to be put aside. Another underground ruin. The hanged man's expression was quite strange. Anyway, he wasn't afraid of being seen through the gray fog. 2 days ago, Mr. World contacted him and asked him to help sell a batch of extraordinary materials and extraordinary characteristics, worth about 60,000 gold pounds in total. The source of these materials was an ancient tomb that Mr. World revealed to Lover. Not long after the last archaeology trip, Mr. World was now asking Ember for help to explore an underground ruin. Are you guys, archaeology, professionals? However, it must be said that archaeology is indeed a quick way to make money. The total income from the last tomb exceeded 60,000 gold pounds. If this underground ruin can be successfully explored, the income is estimated to be considerable as well. After all, just the extraordinary characteristics of that high-sequence evil spirit alone are worth at least tens of thousands of gold pounds. Of course, the hanged man Alger also knew very well that for Ember, these materials that could be exchanged for gold pounds were actually not important. He was more concerned with the ancient history contained in the murals and classics within that underground ruin. And regarding this part of the information, no one in the entire Tarot Club was probably clearer than Ember. Well, except for Mr. Fool. For example, the fact that harvest goddess Omi Bella is Earth Mother, no matter how hard they thought, they couldn't figure it out. However, Alger was still a bit confused. The land abandoned by God that Ember went to was completely different from the land abandoned by God where the sun was. One side was sunny and bright, while the other was shrouded in darkness. Ember could even know the name harvest goddess Omi Bella, which was something not even recorded in Silver City. Combined with what Ember said to the sun, Alger seemed to vaguely grasp something. Suddenly, his expression changed drastically, as if he had an utterly unbelievable guess. Mr. Fool's enigmatic demeanor and Ember's evasiveness about this matter both made him suspect one thing. The land abandoned by God that Ember went to, and the land abandoned by God where the sun is, are perhaps not the same place at all. Klein didn't know what Alger was thinking, he just controlled Mr. World to say in a hoarse voice. Ladies and gentlemen, some recent messages I've received indicate that something big is brewing in Backland, which will bring extremely unstable factors and perhaps a tragedy. What is it? Justice Audrey asked with concern. Her brows were unconsciously slightly furrowed. She also had a premonition that something big was going to happen. But this major event clearly didn't refer to Ember's assassination of George III, as very few people knew about this, and there were no signs. Ember acted on a whim and didn't make any prior plans. Unless someone could peek into their thoughts, it was impossible to detect. But she also vaguely sensed some changes and signs, deeply knowing that there might be other conspiracies brewing in Backland, such as the missing Alfred and the royal family's long-standing shady schemes. And for Audrey, whose family was in Backland, this was undoubtedly extremely important. Only by confirming what was going to happen in advance could she better warn and protect her family. I don't know. World shook his head frankly. Where will the unstable factors and potential tragedy occur? Magician Furs also asked quite nervously. She also lived in Backland and had experienced several major changes within just a few months. If it weren't for the fact that Ember and Zio had reasons to stay in Backland, she would have probably moved away long ago. Mr. World made a difficult expression and shook his head. Those messages contradict each other, making it impossible for me to give a definite answer. At this point, he raised his head and looked sincerely at the figure within the gray fog across the mottled long table. Respected Mr. Fool, you must have sensed something too, right? Everyone's eyes immediately focused on the head of the bronze long table. Some were curious, some worried, some expectant, and some tense. Under such gazes, the Fool Klein leaned back slightly and said plainly and casually. Edsac Augustus. The royal family secretly cooperating with secret organizations like the Twilight Hermit Club, he already knew this. The royal family attempting to create a god, allowing George III to ascend to godhood, he also knew this. But precisely because he knew this, Klein couldn't understand the information he had obtained. Logically, the royal family attempting to create a god should be as low-key as possible, avoiding any major commotion, and ideally having a smooth transition. Only by being low-key could they avoid being detected by the three great churches. However, the information he recently obtained indicated that the royal family seemed to be intentionally planning something big recently, and Edsac Augustus was at the center of this vortex. Klein, who had been controlled by 008, was extremely sensitive to its characteristics. At Prince Edsac's manor, he had a feeling similar to being controlled by coincidence. This indicated that the royal family was not only allied with the Twilight Hermit Club, but also secretly cooperating with Ince Zangwill. This discovery both surprised and delighted Klein. He was delighted because he had a chance to get revenge on Ince Zangwill. Even if he couldn't defeat Ince Zangwill, who had likely become a demigod, he could completely notify the three great churches to take him down. What was surprising was that since the royal family was cooperating with Ince Zangwill at the risk of being discovered by the Church of the Night, their scheme was definitely not small. But the question was, with the help of the Twilight Hermit Club, why would the royal family take the risk of cooperating with Ince Zangwill? Wasn't this contradictory? Prince Edsac. Audrey frowned slightly. She had always disliked Prince Edsac, including his two older brothers. But now that Alfred was missing, because of the royal family, Audrey was even more worried. Whatever happened to Edsac was fine, Audrey was only afraid that it would involve Alfred. But these matters were clearly not suitable to be discussed with everyone in the Tarot Club, not even with Mr. Fool. After hesitating for a long time, Audrey carefully said, Mr. Lover, can we meet at our usual spot after the Tarot Club? Ember's eyes moved slightly, and he nodded gently. Yes. Hearing their conversation, the expressions of the other members of the Tarot Club became somewhat strange, especially Furs and Zio, who knew that justice was Audrey. Chapter 160. At this moment, the curtain rises. Inside the luxurious villa of Earl Hall's family in Empress Borough, Audrey stood before a full-length mirror, staring blankly at her reflection with a slightly worried expression. Just then, she suddenly heard a familiar voice from behind her. Audrey, what are you worried about? Through the mirror, Audrey saw Ember appear accompanied by a burst of azure light. Audrey was not surprised by Ember's sudden appearance. Instead, she felt a sense of relief from the bottom of her heart, because this was what she had requested. The so-called old place referred to her home, as they rarely met elsewhere. Ember. Audrey carefully considered her words and asked, what are your thoughts on Mr. Fool's hint? Ember said concisely, it's unrelated to the ritual the royal family is planning. That's what I thought too. Audrey nodded and said softly, Mr. Fool knows what the royal family is going to do, and he knows your plan, Ember. If he wanted to remind other members about this matter, the hint should have been a broader, Augustus, not specifically Edsac Augustus and an individual. But Prince Edisic is a member of the royal family, and whatever is happening to him must be related to the royal family's plans. Hearing Audrey's analysis, Ember pondered and asked, what is your impression of Edsac? I've never liked him. The young girl slightly furrowed her brows and analyzed seriously, he pursued me for a long time before. At a ball a few months ago, he enthusiastically stopped me to chat about boring topics, indulging in conceited and clumsy humor. But just a few days after that, his attitude became quite cold, even deliberately avoiding me. This might be related to what is happening to Edsac. After a pause, Audrey hesitated and asked, Ember, what do you think? Audrey had many reasons for disliking Edsac, the most important being that as a believer of the Evernight goddess, she could not accept the Augustuses who had worshipped the Lord of Storms for generations. This meant that their pride, arrogance, contempt, and prejudice towards women had deeply rooted in their bones, making it difficult for them to change, and this was something Audrey could not tolerate the most. Therefore, she was quite repulsed by Edsac's pursuit and attentiveness, even feeling some disgust. However, Prince Edisac's change in attitude before and after also made Audrey feel strange, as it was too abrupt, completely without any warning. After listening to Audrey's analysis, Ember said slowly, "Your analysis is very reasonable. Edsac is clearly not a homosexual. Just 2 days ago he was pursuing intensely, but when he met again, he became extremely cold, completely disregarding Backlund's most dazzling gem. This is completely illogical." Audrey rolled her eyes and said, slightly annoyed, "I'm serious. I am also serious." Ember's expression didn't change. Instead, he said very seriously, "Edsac is clearly not the type of person who remains unmoved when faced with beauty. His attitude towards you changed from attentive pursuit to extreme coldness within just a few days. There's only one possibility: he has found a better candidate, and is deliberately keeping his distance from you for fear of being misunderstood by the other person." A better candidate? Audrey slightly furrowed her brows. For Edsac to consider someone a better candidate than her, that person must be at least not inferior in appearance, or even surpass her. But Backlund's aristocratic circle is neither small nor large. After so many social seasons, Audrey basically knew all the aristocrats in Backlund. And the fact that she could be called Backlund's most dazzling gem already indicated her excellence. At least among her peers within the aristocratic circle, there would be no one more beautiful than her. This wasn't pride, but a fact. Although Audrey wasn't proud of it, she couldn't ignore the objective reality. Furthermore, there had been no news of Prince Edisac being passionately in love with any noble young lady in the past few months. One must know that in the past, even if he exchanged a few extra words when striking up a conversation with someone, it could sometimes become a topic of eager discussion. If Prince Edsac were passionately in love with a noble young lady, it would be impossible for there to be no hint of it, unless… Audrey murmured softly, "Unless the better candidate in Edsac's mind is not a noble, but a commoner, which is why he dares not reveal any information." Audrey was naturally somewhat curious about the person Edsac considered better than herself. But she still found it strange, because a commoner was destined not to become a princess, only a noble could become a princess. No matter how outstanding her appearance, she would ultimately only be one of the concubines, not enough to make Edsac give up pursuing Audrey for her sake. After all, Edsac was clearly not someone deeply infatuated. Just like Audrey's impression of the Augustuses, the people of this family have pride towards women deeply rooted in their bones, and it's impossible for them to change for an ordinary woman, no matter how beautiful she is. Unless this woman herself possesses other magic. For example, Audrey. If Edsac truly decided to pursue her, he would likely give up contact with other women because of it. But this wouldn't be because Audrey's appearance was so outstanding, nor because she was Backlund's most dazzling gem. It would simply be because her father is Earl Hall, and because of the power and wealth her father possesses. Even if Edsac were to abandon the pursuit of other women, it would only be to show his single-minded devotion to Audrey, thereby gaining Earl Hall's support. That is all. And a commoner woman, without power and wealth, relying solely on appearance, is simply not enough to make Edsac completely devoted. As for Edsac's current change, there is only one other possibility. Beyonder ability. Ember lightly tapped the table with his finger and said slowly, "The royal family has always been cooperating with the witch cult, and a demoness is perfectly capable of making Edsac completely devoted to her." Audrey clearly thought of this possibility as well, but she still furrowed her brows and retorted, "Couldn't it just be love?" Ember thought for a moment, then nodded gently and said, "It's possible, but I still think the possibility of a Beyonder ability is higher." Audrey nodded silently, tacitly agreeing with Ember's guess. People who would disregard everything for love certainly exist, just like her. But Edsac, or rather, the Augustuses, would never have such a person among them. With pride towards women deeply rooted in their bones, they wouldn't believe in so-called love at all. So, just as Ember said, the possibility of a Beyonder ability is indeed higher. Even though she had already guessed some information, the young girl still frowned, puzzled, and said, "But this still doesn't explain what will happen to him. The witch cult and the royal family are in a cooperative relationship. They wouldn't harm Edsac, and the royal family wouldn't allow such a thing to happen." Ember calmly shook his head and said slowly, "That's not necessarily true. Without the royal family's tacit approval, would the witch cult dare to let a demoness seduce Edsac? Being able to be seduced by a demoness already indicates that Edsac is a discarded piece. The only question is, where exactly will this discarded piece be used? Audrey furrowed her brows, thinking silently to herself. Father and Hilbert should know more. I can ask them when they come back tonight. Sherwood Borough, 15 Minsk Street. After the tarot club ended, Klein went down to the first floor and sat in the living room, feeling the warmth radiating from the fireplace. He gently rocked in the armchair, not reading the newspaper, flipping through a magazine, or reading a book. Everything was so peaceful and silent until the sound of the doorbell jingled. Wearing a home shirt and a cashmere vest, Klein got up and walked outside, finding the visitor somewhat unexpected. He opened the door and chuckled. "Good afternoon, Emlyn. Shouldn't you be helping at the Harvest Church at this hour?" The visitor was none other than the vampire Emlyn White, with his hair slicked back diagonally, looking handsome but somewhat effeminate. Hearing Klein's greeting, Emlyn's originally arrogant expression instantly froze, and it took him a while to recover. "I have something I want to consult you about, Sherlock Moriarty, detective." Emlyn spat out each word one by one. After inviting him into the living room, Klein returned to the armchair and asked with a smile. "What is it?" "The consultation fee is £1, but it cannot exceed 1 hour." Emlyn White didn't mind his words and said thoughtfully. "A big figure wants me to do something. Although that matter can indirectly help me solve a hidden danger, it also contains high risks. I don't have many friends and I'm afraid my parents will worry, and you are a knowledgeable Beander detective. What do you suggest? Refuse, or accept? Solve a hidden danger. Remove psychological suggestion." Klein considered his words and said, "With only the word, matter, I cannot give any advice." Emlyn White was silent for several seconds, gritted his teeth, and lowered his voice. "It's related to that fool." "Ah." Klein almost raised his hand to pick his ear. In the evening, Earl Hall and Hilbert successively returned home. The family gathered around the long dining table in the restaurant, where the sumptuous dinner shimmered with enticing colors under the glow of many candles. Audrey cut a piece of steak and asked without concealing her curiosity. "Father, has anything happened to Prince Edisic recently?" Earl Hall's knife and fork paused, and he raised his eyebrows and said, "What did you hear?" Audrey, who read the information she wanted from her father's reaction, responded with a slight smile. "Some rumors. It seems this is true." Earl Hall rubbed his forehead and said, "It's nothing too serious. Audrey, I know what you're thinking, so I don't need to hide it from you. This involves a relatively common royal family scandal. Simply put, Prince Edisic fell in love with a commoner woman. This led to the death of a noble descendant. The royal family has suppressed the spread of the matter, not wanting to cause too great an impact." Audrey's heart was chilled, feeling a shiver run down her spine. Just as Ember guessed, that commoner woman is very likely a demoness. There must be a bigger conspiracy hidden behind this. Audrey carefully considered her words and said, "The Prince Edisic I remember isn't this kind of person, and rumors are already spreading that what they truly want to cover up might not be this matter." "Perhaps not." Earl Hall chewed on this sentence, his brows unconsciously furrowing slightly. Audrey knew when to stop and subtly led the topic in another direction. Her eyes revealed traces of confusion and puzzlement as she asked, "Didn't Alfred say he would be back half a month ago? Why is there still no news?" "It's a good thing." Earl Hall's expression suddenly relaxed, and he said with a smile, "Alfred has been transferred by the royal family to carry out some confidential missions. After this mission is completed, he can obtain significant benefits. For example, a hereditary title of at least Viscount." "Viscount, huh?" Upon hearing this, Hilbert paused his steak-cutting motion, his eyes revealing a clear look of envy. Although he could inherit the Earl title just by lying down, Alfred's achievements made him extremely envious. Because if this trend continues, it's only a matter of time before Alfred becomes an Earl, and even a Marquis isn't impossible. Audrey's brows were tightly furrowed because her intuition told her something was very wrong. Just a few days ago, when her father and mother secretly discussed this matter, they were still worried about Alfred's safety and even explicitly expressed the idea of not wanting to get too deeply involved with the royal family. And to prevent her and Hilbert from getting involved, they hadn't even revealed a word to them, hoping to protect them in any future potential changes. But now, his attitude had suddenly taken a complete 180-degree turn. Instead of worrying about Alfred participating in the royal family's secret mission, he was happy about it. This undoubtedly made Audrey sense something unusual. Especially the possibility of Edsac being influenced by a demoness, which instinctively made Audrey associate it. Earl Hall's change in attitude might also be influenced by Beander power. And to influence Earl Hall, who is just an ordinary person, it wouldn't even require a very strong Beander ability, even Audrey herself could do it. As a psychiatrist, she could completely hypnotize Earl Hall, who is just an ordinary person, with psychological suggestion without him realizing it. Of course, she wouldn't do such a thing to her father, but what about the royal family? The royal family has the existence of Huan Billance, who is suspected to be a spectator pathway demigod. Audrey suddenly furrowed her brows and said in a slightly complaining low voice. Then, won't Alfred miss the New Year's Eve party? This perfectly fit the character of a slightly willful noble young lady and wouldn't arouse anyone's suspicion. The Countess comforted. Audrey, think on the bright side. Before she finished speaking, Earl Hall interrupted her, frowning. Audrey, you are almost an adult now, no longer a willful child. How can you still be so insensible? This matter concerns Alfred and the future of the entire Hall family. How can it be delayed by a New Year's Eve party? As soon as he finished speaking, the eyes of the Earl's family were all focused on Earl Hall. There was some surprise and doubt in their eyes. At this point, not only Audrey, but even the Countess and Hilbert found it incredible. Audrey pursed her lips tightly and lowered her head, looking like a wronged little girl who had been scolded, using this to conceal her inner nervousness and fear. If just now she had only suspected that Earl Hall was influenced by a Beyonder ability, now she was completely certain. If father were in his normal state, he wouldn't possibly say something like this. He would comfort me like mother, instead of putting on an unfeeling attitude to scold him. Something has influenced father, making him prioritize Alfredus's secret mission, not allowing anyone or anything to go against it. This ability was very familiar to Audrey, because this was simply the psychological suggestion of the spectator pathway. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.